Eleanor Dawson hit the mud on her knees, suitcase split open, $11 scattered in the dirt, and the giant cowboy standing over her didn't offer his hand. He crouched down, looked her dead in the eye, and said it quiet enough that nobody else could hear. "I'll build you a home. Just give me a family." She'd buried a husband, lost a farm, and survived 3 years of being told she was too broken to be loved. She wasn't looking for rescue, but Cole Maverick wasn't offering rescue. He was offering something far more dangerous. If you've ever been handed a second chance you weren't sure you deserved, this story is for you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? Stay with us. You'll want to see how this ends. The freight wagon hit a rut 3 blocks from the center of Black Ridge, and Eleanor Dawson grabbed the sideboards with both hands and held on, which was how she'd been living for 3 years. Grabbing on, not falling. The wagon lurched back to level, and she straightened her coat and picked up her suitcase from where it had slid, and told herself, the way she told herself every morning, one more town, one more start, one more try. She was 34 years old. She had $11 in her coat pocket. She had a suitcase held shut with a leather belt because the latch had broken somewhere in Nebraska, and a bruise along her left jaw that she had explained to 3 different people in 3 different towns as a doorframe. Nobody had believed her. She could tell by the way they looked, that combination of pity and wariness that people reserved for women who arrived in frontier towns alone, without a man beside them, without a clean explanation for why. Black Ridge, Wyoming was her 3rd town in 18 months. She was not looking for rescue. She told herself that every single morning, the way some women recited scripture. Not looking for rescue, looking for work, looking for enough money to eventually stop moving, looking for a place quiet enough that she could breathe without someone else deciding how deep that breath should go. She climbed down from the wagon, thanked the driver, and lifted her suitcase. Then her foot hit the mud slick she hadn't seen. Both legs went sideways at once, and the suitcase flew forward, and her whole body followed it toward the ground. She didn't hit. A hand closed around her wrist, one hand, closed completely around her wrist, the way a fence post closed around nothing, because the man attached to it was the largest person she had ever seen in her life. He was crouching beside her, having apparently moved from the hitching post 6 feet away in the time it took her to fall, and his expression was mild and unhurried. Like catching falling women was simply something that happened on Tuesdays in Black Ridge, and he had no strong feelings about it either way. She found her footing. She pulled her wrist back. She straightened herself with the particular dignity of a woman who had spent years refusing help gracefully. "I had it," she said. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not quite gestion of one. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Looked like it. He handed her the suitcase, stood up to his full height, which took a moment, tipped his hat. Then he crouched back down, right there in the mud, and began gathering the items that had spilled. When the belt gave a hairbrush, a small book, a folded piece of paper she'd been carrying for 2 years that she would not explain to anyone. He picked each one up carefully, like they mattered, and held them out to her in both hands, without looking at what they were. She took them. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "Welcome," he said. He walked away. Eleanor stood in the street of Black Ridge, Wyoming, with mud on her knees and her whole life in her hands, and watched him go, and told herself she felt nothing except mild gratitude that her face had not hit the ground. She was lying, but she was very good at lying to herself by then. She'd had years of practice. Mabel Cartwright ran the boarding house on the north end of Black Ridge and had outlasted 2 husbands, 1 prairie fire, and a 3-year property dispute with the general store owner that she had won by the simple method of refusing to acknowledge it existed. She had the kind of face that had once been pretty and had become something better with age, interesting. And she had the particular skill of making people feel seen without making them feel examined. She took one look at Eleanor Dawson in her doorway, the suitcase with the belt, the bruise, the posture of someone braced for the word no, and said, "I've got a room on the 2nd floor with a window facing east. Breakfast at 7. I don't require explanations about where people come from." Eleanor had not cried in 4 months. She came very close right then. How much, she managed? $3 a week, meals included. "I'll take it." She was upstairs and sitting on the edge of the bed with her coat still on before she let herself exhale for the first time in what felt like years. The room was small and clean, and the window faced east exactly as promised, and outside it was the mountain, closer than she expected, rising up above the town with the particular solidity of something that had been standing long before anyone arrived and would be standing long after everyone left. She looked at it for a long time. Then she unpacked her suitcase, found a needle and thread, and fixed the latch. She was not a woman who left things broken when she had the means to fix them. She found work within 2 days. Patricia Holt's seamstress shop needed someone whose eyesight was still reliable and whose stitching ran straight. Patricia's own vision had been failing for 6 months in ways she wouldn't quite admit, which was evident in the hemlines she'd been producing. Eleanor sat down, threaded a needle in one pass, sewed a test seam that was so level Patricia held it up to the window to check, and was hired before noon. Good with her hands, always had been. She settled into Black Ridge's rhythms quickly, the way she'd learned to settle into every new place quietly, efficiently, with the minimum necessary information about herself and the maximum attention paid to everyone else. She learned who argued with whom, which families were struggling and which were merely pretending not to, which distinctions mattered in a frontier town, because the ones pretending were often closest to the edge. She heard about Cole Maverick inside her first week. You couldn't live in Black Ridge without hearing about Cole Maverick. He came to town once a week for supplies, ran the largest ranch in the valley, 1,200 acres on the mountain plateau above the town, built up over 10 years from a single claim into something other ranchers mentioned with a respect that occasionally edged toward resentment. He had a crew of 4, a horse operation, and a house he'd built himself that people described in tones reserved for something between admiration and disbelief. Biggest house in 3 counties, Harold Finch told her, because Harold Finch told everyone everything eventually. Built every room himself. Man's got more space in that house, if you ask me. He's never married, Eleanor asked. Not because she was interested, because it was the natural follow-up. Harold's expression did something complicated. There was a woman, 8 years ago, came out from Ohio, spent 1 winter on the mountain and decided she preferred Ohio. He paused. Cole finished the house anyway, every room, like he was waiting on someone who never showed up. Eleanor filed this under none of your business and went back to her fabric samples. She saw him the following Tuesday. He came into Finch's store while she was buying thread, and the store felt immediately smaller, not because he was aggressive or demanding attention, but simply because he was present, the way a large tree was simply present in a field. He nodded at Finch, nodded at Eleanor without recognition, set his list on the counter. Eleanor pretended to examine thread colors with great concentration. She heard him and Finch talk low, practical conversation, grain prices and fence posts and weather. Cole's voice was quieter than she expected for his size. He didn't fill silence the way some men did, just to prove they could. She turned to leave and nearly walked into him, because he'd stepped back at the same moment. He caught her elbow, steadied her, let go immediately. "We seem to keep meeting like this," he said. "Like what?" "Like you're in motion and I'm in the way." "I wasn't falling this time," she said. "You stepped into my path. No defensiveness. No explanation." A pause. "Cole Maverick," he says, and put out his hand. She looked at it for 1 beat longer than was polite. Then she shook it. New to Black Ridge. 3 weeks, working for Patricia Holt. Word travels fast. "Small town," he said, and then simply, "It's a good one." He said it like he meant it, not a boast, not a sales pitch. Like a man who believed the place he'd built his life was worth believing in and thought she might want to know. Eleanor didn't know what to do with plain sincerity. She'd been so long in places where everything said had a secondary purpose that she'd nearly forgotten what it sounded like without one. "Good day, Mr. Maverick," he said, and walked out. She heard him say, "Good day, Mrs. Dawson," behind her, and the thing that unsettled her was not that he'd gotten the title right. It was the way he said it, not as assumption. As a question he was leaving open for her to answer if and when she chose. She chose not to think about it. She did not entirely succeed. The 3rd time was not an accident, not on his part anyway. Eleanor was walking back from a delivery on the south side of town, taking the longer route because the late afternoon light was good, and she wanted 10 minutes that belonged to nobody. She turned a corner and stopped. 3 boys, 14, 15, 16, had backed a younger child against the wall of the blacksmith's shop. The small boy's coat was in the mud. His lunch pail was in the oldest boy's hand. The oldest one was performing the way boys that age performed cruelty, just enough to enjoy it, not enough to feel the weight of it yet. Eleanor set down her basket. "Hey, Sharp, the way you said it when you meant stop what you're doing this instant." The three boys turned. The oldest one looked her over, with the particular contempt of someone who had already learned, from watching adults, how to dismiss a woman with his eyes. "Mind your business, lady. Give him back his lunch pail," Eleanor said. Or what? It was a genuine question. He knew the math of the situation. She was one woman alone on an empty street. Eleanor also knew the math. She was calculating how to make it work in her favor when a shadow fell across all of them at once, and Cole Maverick came around the corner of the blacksmith shop from the other direction, carrying a saddle. Under one arm, like it weighed nothing. He stopped. He took in the scene: the lunch pail, the mud-covered coat, the three boys, Eleanor standing with her arms folded and her chin up. He said nothing. He simply stood there. The oldest boy's confidence evaporated. Not slowly. The lunch pail was returned. The boys left quickly. The younger boy grabbed his things and ran without looking back. Cole and Eleanor stood in the empty street, and he looked at her with the expression she was beginning to be able to read, the one that meant he'd noticed something and was deciding what to do with it. "You were handling it," he said. "I was about to," she agreed. "I know." He shifted the saddle. "I could tell. There it was. Not good thing I showed up. Not you would have needed help. Just I could tell." She picked up her basket. "Thank you for the backup I didn't ask for." "You're welcome for it anyway." She walked. She didn't look back. But she heard something in his voice, in those last 4 words that she filed away somewhere. She wouldn't examine for a while. A quality that was not flattery and not performance, and was not trying to be anything except what it was. That night, at Mabel's kitchen table with tea she hadn't asked for, that appeared at her elbow anyway, Eleanor said, "He keeps being present at moments." "Cole Maverick," Mabel said. "He's not pursuing me. He's just there." "He's been coming into town once a week for 9 years," Mabel said. "Since you arrived, that's changed." She turned her cup. "He helped the Petersons rebuild their barn 2 winters ago. Didn't ask for anything back. Showed up with lumber and his crew and was done in 4 days." She paused. "He hasn't shown interest in a single woman in this town in 8 years. Whatever he's doing, it's not casual." "I'm not interested," Eleanor said. "I didn't say you were. You were thinking it." "I was thinking," Mabel said carefully, "that a woman who says she's not interested generally doesn't bring the man up herself." Eleanor drank her tea. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about "I could tell" 3 words, plainly said, that had done more for her than 3 years of people telling her she was strong and capable and would be fine. Because there was a difference between being told you were capable and being watched by someone who simply assumed it. She had almost forgotten that difference existed. She told herself it didn't matter. She did not sleep for a long time. 4 weeks after Eleanor arrived in Black Ridge, Cole Maverick rode into town on a Friday, not his usual Tuesday, which Harold Finch noted and relayed to approximately everyone within 4 hours, because in a town of 340 people, a man changing his weekly routine was meteorological-level news. He came to Patricia Holt's seamstress shop. Eleanor was at the back table. She heard the bell above the door, heard Patricia's surprised greeting, heard a low voice she recognized before she could see him. "I need something made, curtains, 12 windows, for a house." Patricia looked toward the back room. "My assistant handles the larger orders." Eleanor set down her work. She came out. Cole was at the counter with a folded paper of measurements. He met her eyes when she appeared and did not pretend he hadn't known she would be there. She respected that. She found it inconvenient in equal measure. "Mr. Maverick." A pause. "Or is it Miss?" "It was Mrs.," she said. "My husband died 3 years ago." Something moved in his expression, not pity, which would have been wrong. Recognition. The look of someone who understood loss and wasn't going to perform sympathy at her. "I'm sorry for that," he said. "Thank you." She took the measurements. 12 windows, large. The kind put in a house built to let the light in. "Good muslin, or heavier for winter. Something that'll last," he said. She named a price, fair. Not discounted. She didn't discount for men, because they were large and standing in her workspace. He agreed immediately, which told her she'd priced it correctly. 2 weeks, she said. "That's fine." He turned to leave. Stopped. Turned back. "Mrs. Dawson." He said it the way a man said something he'd decided on before he walked through the door. "I'll be at the church social Saturday. I'm not generally a man for socials, but I intend to be there." He left that sitting. She understood what he was saying. He wasn't asking. He was telling her where he would be, and leaving every other decision entirely to her. Which was, she would think about later, exactly the right way to say it. "I've been meaning to attend," she said, "to meet more of the community." "That's a good reason," he said. Yes, she said, it is. He left. Patricia appeared from behind the counter with an expression Eleanor had not seen on another person's face directed at her, since she was a young woman with reasons to inspire it. Don't, Eleanor said. I didn't say a word, Patricia said. The church social was loud and warm and smelled like three kinds of pie, and the combination of wood smoke and effort that filled any room where a frontier community was trying its best. Eleanor arrived with Mabel. She met families she hadn't yet met, listened to their stories with the genuine attention she'd always had for people's lives, a quality she'd had to nearly kill in order to survive the past 3 years, and was carefully reviving. Cole arrived 40 minutes in. Cleaned up different shirt, hair combed, boots that were not his work boots. He spoke near the door, accepted pie, and then his eyes found Eleanor across the room, and he walked toward her with the same unhurried certainty he applied to everything. Mrs. Maverick. Good pie, I've heard. They both knew they could stand there, trading small talk, for the rest of the evening, and both were capable of it, and neither of them wanted to. Would you walk with me, he said. Outside. Around the building. 10 minutes, she looked at the directness of it. 10 minutes, she said. They walked in the cooling evening air, and for the first 3 minutes said nothing, which turned out not to be uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that existed between people who didn't need to fill space to prove they were at ease in it. Cole spoke first. I run 1,200 acres, he said. Cattle, mostly. I've got 4 good men, but the book's the administrative side. I'm not built for it. I never have been. She looked at him sideways. Are you offering me a job? I'm telling you something true, he said, and letting you do whatever you want with it. She stopped beside her. Why me? She said. Why what? You've known people in this town for years. Why me? He looked at her straight. Because you faced 3 boys bigger than you and didn't flinch, he said. Because when I offered my hand the first day, you looked at it for 3 full seconds before deciding. Because you priced those curtains fair and didn't adjust when you saw the size of me. He paused. Because I've been building something on that mountain for 10 years. And I've always done it alone. I built a house with 12 windows. He stopped. I just ordered curtains for them. That's the first time I've done that. The night air was still. Eleanor Dawson stood in the dark outside a Wyoming church and understood she was at a crossroads, not dramatic, not the kind anyone made speeches at. The quiet kind. The kind where one ordinary decision opened a door that couldn't be closed again. She was afraid. She was also 34 years old and had survived too much to let fear make her decisions. I'll think about the books, she said. As a professional arrangement. That's all I'm asking, he said. It wasn't all he was asking. They both knew that, but they were sensible adults, and sensible adults left things room to breathe. We should go back inside, she said, before Mabel decides we've eloped. The smile that had been threatening for weeks finally arrived. Quiet, contained, entirely real. Wouldn't want that, he said. They went back in. Mabel raised her eyebrows 1 millimeter across the room. Eleanor looked away. She started going up the mountain the following week. The ranch was extraordinary, 1,200 working acres, 4 solid outbuildings, a barn newer than the rest, and the house. She had heard it described. Description had not prepared her. 6 rooms, plank floors, a stone fireplace, ceilings high enough that Cole moved through doorways without ducking, which had clearly been the primary engineering concern. And the 12 windows, facing in 4 directions, built to catch light at every hour of the day. It was one of the most beautiful houses she'd ever been inside. It was also the loneliest, not from neglect. It was clean, tidy, deliberately arranged. Lonely in the way spaces were lonely when they had been built for living, and life hadn't arrived yet. Every room waiting. Every window facing outward, at something that hadn't walked through the door. Cole showed her the small side room desk, chair shelf, 3 years of ledgers stacked without ceremony. I'll warn you, he said. They're rough. She opened the top ledger. They were rough. 6 different systems across 3 years, used inconsistently with at least 3 errors that she found in the first hour that had cost him money he didn't know he'd lost. She worked through the morning. At midday she took her lunch to the porch, because the eastern light was extraordinary. Cole had clearly understood which direction the best autumn light came from when he built this place, and she ate and looked down at the valley and Black Ridge, small and clear below it, and thought about nothing in particular. Cole came up on the porch and leaned against the railing facing the same view. Neither spoke for several minutes. What were you before the farm? He said eventually. She looked over. What do you mean? Before you were a farmer's wife. Before all of this. What were you planning to be? Nobody asked her that. People asked what she did, where she came from, where she was going. Not what she had once planned. I was good at mathematics, she said. My father thought it was a waste in a girl. I kept doing it anyway. A pause. I taught school for 2 years in Kansas, 1 room, 30 children. She looked at the mountains. Then I married Daniel and we moved to the farm. Did you want to leave the teaching? Some days I think the teaching and the farm were the same thing, learning to make something work with what you have, not what you planned for. She paused. Other days I think I spent my 20s building someone else's dream and forgot to keep working on my own. The hawk turned on a thermal somewhere out in the air above them. What is your dream? Cole said, quietly, facing the valley so it was easier to ask. She considered deflecting. She was an expert at it. Instead, something of my own. Not large, just mine. Where my presence isn't contingent on whether I'm useful enough to someone else. Cole turned. He looked at her with something careful and real at the same time. You could have that here, he said. The ground shifted. Not metaphorically, or not only, because she knew what he was saying. And she knew he wasn't impulsive. This was not a fast decision man. Every board of this house had been placed where he intended. Everything he built to last. Cole, she said. Too soon, he said. I know, and I know you've got reasons to be careful that have nothing to do with me. He turned back to the valley. I'm being honest because I tried the other thing once, not being honest, and it didn't build anything worth keeping. She sat with that. I'm not a simple woman, she said finally. I won't be managed. I don't intend to fold myself into the shape of what someone else needs. I know that, he said. You say that now. I'll say it in 2 years, he said. 5, whenever you need to hear it again. He paused. I've been alone on this mountain a long time. I don't want someone to rescue or to manage. He stopped, started over. I built every room of that house knowing what I wanted it to be. I just didn't know who I was building it for. He looked at her. I think I do now, but that's your decision, not mine. Eleanor said nothing for a long moment. The hawk held the air above them. Ask me again in the spring, she said. That's a yes, he said. Very carefully. That's a maybe, she said, with conditions, which I'll outline in writing. He laughed, surprised by it, short and genuine and warm, the kind of laugh that only came when something caught a person completely off guard. I'd expect nothing less, he said. She was not going to smile. She smiled anyway. She turned toward the valley so he couldn't see it. He knew. They both knew. What neither of them knew, what they could not see from that porch in the September light, with the distance below them and the mountain above, was that 300 miles east, in a Casper law office, a man named Harlan Voss was running his finger down a map of the Wyoming Valley territories. He stopped on a stretch of land, good water access, mountain elevation, control over everything below. He read the name beside it, Maverick Ranch, 1,200 acres. He looked up at the young man across the desk. Find out who owns this, he said, and find out what they owe. He said it the way a man spoke when the answer didn't matter yet, because the plan was already decided and the answer was just a detail to be collected on the way. On the mountain above Black Ridge, Eleanor Dawson gathered the autumn light and breathed air that was beginning to feel, dangerously, like somewhere she might be willing to stay. Around her, the house held its 12 windows and waited for its curtains. And 3 feet away, Cole Maverick said nothing, and the silence between them was full of something neither of them had the word for yet. But they were patient people. They could wait for the right word. What was already moving down the road from Casper could not wait at all. And it was coming faster than either of them knew. But they were both patient people, and patience, Eleanor Dawson had learned the hard way, was only a virtue until the thing you were waiting on decided it was done waiting for you. The first sign that something was wrong came not from a letter, not from a stranger riding into town, but from Harold Finch. Harold Finch, who knew everything about everyone and generally operated as Black Ridge's unofficial early warning system, came into Patricia Holt's shop on a Wednesday morning in early October with a face that Eleanor had not seen on him before. Harold's normal expression was one of contained importance, the look of a man who held information and was deciding how to dispense it. This was different. This was the look of a man who had received information he didn't know what to do with. "You're friendly with Cole Maverick," he said to Eleanor, without preamble. She didn't look up from the hem she was working. "I do his accounts." "Then you might want to know, there were 2 men in my store yesterday afternoon. City men. Not dressed for ranch work or travel dressed for offices. One of them asked me about water rights in the upper valley. The other one was writing things down." Now she looked up. "What kind of things?" "He didn't show me. but he asked about property lines, about who owned what above the 800-foot elevation line. Harold set his hands on the counter. He asked specifically about the Maverick Ranch. Eleanor set down her needle. Did they give names? The one who talked said his name was Aldridge. Didn't say who he worked for. Paid for a tin of tobacco and left. Harold paused. I've been in this business 30 years. I know what a land surveyor looks like when he's not carrying his equipment yet. Eleanor was already untying her apron. I need to get a message to Cole, she said. I thought you might, Harold said, and for once didn't add anything to it. She wrote a note. 4 lines, practical. She gave it to one of the livery boys with a coin and instructions to ride it up to the mountain directly and wait for a response. The response came back in 2 hours, in Cole's handwriting, large, careful letters, the handwriting of a man who had taught himself and never entirely trusted the result. I know, come Thursday. Bring the land deed records if you can find them in the county file. She looked at that note for a long moment. I know. He already knew, and he hadn't told her. She folded the note and put it in her pocket, and went back to work and spent the rest of the afternoon being very precise about every stitch, which was what she did when something was sitting in her chest that she hadn't decided how to handle yet. Thursday morning she rode up the mountain with a copy of Cole's land deed records, requested from the county clerk citing her role as his accounts manager, which was technically accurate, and a series of questions she intended to ask in a specific order. Cole met her at the door before she dismounted. You're early, he said. You already knew about the men in Finch's store. Come inside. That was not a denial, which was confirmation. She went inside. He took her coat. She sat down at the desk in the side room. He stood in the doorway with his arms folded, and the look of someone who had been deciding how much to say. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. Not the version where you decide what I need to know. The actual beginning. He looked at her. She looked back. He pulled up the chair from the corner and sat down. There's a man named Harlan Voss, he said. He operates out of Casper. He buys land, or he gets it. He's been moving through the Valley territories for 2 years. He acquires property from people who are struggling, offers low, uses legal pressure when people won't sell, and sometimes finds he stopped. Irregularities in deed records, historical ones. Things that were filed wrong 20 years ago that nobody noticed until suddenly someone with money and lawyers is pointing at them. And your deed, Eleanor said. My original claim was filed in '79. The land office in Laramie had a clerk who processed claims incorrectly that year, not fraudulently, just incorrectly. It affected about 30 properties in this territory. Most of them were small enough that nobody cared. Mine wasn't small. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. How long have you known? I found out 6 weeks ago. A rancher down in the South Valley, Peterson. He got a letter from a law firm in Casper raising questions about his eastern boundary. The description in his letter matched exactly what I'd heard was happening further north. Cole looked at his hands. I had my own deed pulled and examined. There's a 300-yard discrepancy in the northeast boundary description. In 19,879, the clerk wrote thence north by northeast, when it should have been thence north by northwest. That 300-yard error, if challenged correctly in court, could shift my boundary line in a way that affects your water access, Eleanor said. He looked at her. You're fast, he said. I've been looking at your land maps for 6 weeks. The northeast corner is where your main creek runs from the high elevation down through the property. If that boundary shifts 300 yards, I lose the primary water source for the upper pasture, which means the upper pasture can't run cattle, which means my operation loses a third of its capacity. He paused. And the land Voss's people would gain access to sits at the junction of 3 water sources. It's the most valuable piece of ground in this entire valley. Eleanor sat very still. Why didn't you tell me, she said. Quietly, genuinely asking. He was quiet for a moment. Because it's my problem, he said. I built this place. If I'm going to lose it, I'm the one who should. Stop, she said. He stopped. That is the most stubborn thing I have heard from a grown man in 10 years, she said. And I was married to a man who once decided not to tell me we were 3 months behind on the mortgage because he didn't want me to worry. She leaned forward. You know, held her eyes. I'm not him, he said. I know you're not, but you're doing the same thing. You're carrying something alone because you've convinced yourself that's what strength looks like. She spread her hands on the desk. Strength isn't one person holding everything up until they break. Strength is knowing when to say, this is bigger than me alone, and I need help thinking through it. The room was very quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up against the mountain, the kind of October wind that meant winter was making its intentions known early. Cole looked at the desk, then at her, then back at the desk. "All right," he said very quietly. "All right," she repeated. "Now, tell me what you have and let's figure out what we're dealing with." She opened the land deed records she'd brought, and they began. Took 2 hours to go through everything: the original deed, the county records, the boundary descriptions, a map of the property lines Cole had drawn himself over the years that was more accurate than the official survey. Eleanor worked through the documents, the way she worked through a ledger, systematically, methodically, her finger moving down columns and across paragraphs, her mind building the picture. Cole watched her work. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to guide her conclusions. He sat across the desk and answered questions when she asked them directly, and let her reach her own understanding at her own pace. And she was aware of this, the specific quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of a man waiting to correct her, but the stillness of a man who trusted what she was doing. She had not been trusted to think through a problem without intervention since she was 22 years old and teaching school. She kept that realization where it was and kept working. "There's something you missed," she said, at the end of the second hour. He straightened. She turned the deed to face him and pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of the second page, the kind of paragraph that appeared in official documents to satisfy legal requirements and that most people, reading a deed, would skip entirely. "This clause," she said, "right here. Said boundaries as described herein to be confirmed by mutual agreement of adjacent landholders upon the occasion of any future survey. Do you see it?" Cole read it. "Read it again. What does that mean?" "It means when your deed was filed, it included a provision, probably standard language for that clerk's off in 79, that says any boundary dispute has to go through a process of agreement with adjacent landholders, not just a legal challenge from an outside party." She looked up at him. "Voss is not an adjacent landholder. He doesn't own anything that touches your property, which means his lawyers can raise questions about the boundary description, but they cannot challenge it in court directly. They would need to find someone who does own adjacent land to bring the challenge." Cole stared at the document. "Who owns adjacent land?" he said. "3 properties. The Hennessy farm to the south, that's 12 acres. The county road right-of-way to the west, which is not a private owner. And the northeast corner." She paused. She looked at the map. "The northeast corner where the boundary error exists. That land directly adjacent to your northeast line." She traced the map. "It's listed as unimproved territory, not claimed." "Yet," Cole said, the word landed like a stone in still water. "Yet," Eleanor agreed. They looked at each other. "If Voss's people file a claim on that unimproved northeast parcel," Eleanor said, "they become an adjacent landholder, which gives them standing to challenge your boundary under this clause." "How fast can they file a claim?" "Fast. If they've already surveyed it, and I think those men in Finch's store were doing exactly that, they could file inside of 2 weeks. Cole stood up. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her, looking out at the mountain. She watched the tension in his shoulders, the particular set of a man recalculating something significant. "Then I need to file first," he said. "You can't file a claim on land adjacent to your own property. There's a conflict of interest provision." "Not me," he said. He turned around. "Can someone else file? Someone who has a legitimate reason to want that land." Eleanor thought about it. He was watching her think. "A small holding," she said slowly. "A legitimate agricultural claim. Someone who could genuinely use a small parcel." For she stopped. "For what?" he said. "For a kitchen garden, for chickens, for the kind of small agricultural operation a woman living alone might reasonably need." She met his eyes. "The claim would be small, maybe 15 acres, exactly the northeast parcel. Enough to be legitimate." "A woman living alone," Cole said, very carefully, "with a legitimate reason to be in this valley. Established residence, employment record, known to the community." She paused. "That claim would need to be filed by someone with no existing connection to the Maverick Ranch. Someone independent." "Eleanor, it's the right move," she said. "Legally, it blocks Voss from acquiring standing, and it's a legitimate claim. I have the right to file it. I've been a resident for over a month. I have employment, I have. I won't let you put yourself in the middle of this," he said. "You're not letting me do anything," she said. And she said it the way she said things she meant completely. "I'm choosing to, because it's the right thing and because I can see the board, and this is the move." She closed the folder of deed records. "Now, do you want to argue about it? Or do you want to go to the county clerk's office in Larrabee before Voss's people do?" He looked at her for a long moment. The look on his face was something she hadn't seen there before. It wasn't the contained, almost smile she'd learned to read, and it wasn't the careful professional respect he'd maintained through their working weeks. It was something more unguarded than either of those. Something that made her look away first, which was unusual, because Eleanor Dawson didn't generally look away first. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. "You drive a hard bargain for someone who was supposedly just organizing my ledgers." "Your ledgers were a disaster," she said. "Everything about this situation is a disaster. But disasters can be managed if you catch them early enough." He got his coat. She got hers. They rode down the mountain together for the first time. The county clerk's office in Larrabee was a 2-hour ride southeast, and they made it in a day there and back, with the claim paperwork filed by mid-afternoon. The clerk, a man named Burroughs, who had been stamping documents for 20 years and had seen everything and was surprised by nothing, took Eleanor's application, verified her residency documentation, and filed it with the particular unhurried efficiency of a man who did not understand what was urgent about this and didn't need to. On the ride back, they didn't talk much. But it was the kind of not talking that meant both people were processing the same weight. It was Cole who finally said, "You understand, this might make you a target." "I understand it might make us both targets," Eleanor said. "Which is better than you being one alone." He rode beside her. "I'm going to ask you again," he said. "And I want you to hear the question properly, not the way you've been hearing it." She kept her eyes on the trail. "I'm listening," she said. "I've been alone that mountain for a long time," he said. "And I'm not good at saying things like this. I've said it wrong before, and I'd rather say it right even if it takes longer." He paused. "What I want you to be there, not as an employee, not as someone I hired to fix my books. I want you there in the way that means permanent. Yours as much as mine." He was quiet for a moment. "Every room." The trail moved under them. The mountains were turning the colors that Wyoming mountains turned in October, burnt and gold and something darker underneath, like the land was preparing itself for something. "You're asking me to marry you," Eleanor said. "I'm asking if that's something you could want," he said. "When you're ready." "I know you said spring. I'm not pushing. I'm just saying it plain so there's no confusion about what I mean." She thought about Daniel, about the farm, about the 2 years in her sister's house, and the bruise on her jaw that she had called a doorframe, and everyone had pretended to believe. She thought about the way Cole had said I could tell when she'd been facing those boys, and the way he'd handed her the land deed records, like they were hers to examine, and the way he'd sat across that desk for 2 hours while she worked through documents that affected his entire life and hadn't once tried to tell her what conclusion to reach. "I don't know yet," she said. "I mean that honestly, not as a deflection." "I know you do," he said. "But I'm not ruling it out," she said. "Which is," she paused. "Which is more than I would have said 2 months ago." He nodded. That was enough. She was learning. A man who knew how to accept partial answers without forcing them into complete ones before they were ready. They rode back to Black Ridge in the early evening. Mabel Cartwright was on the boarding house porch when Eleanor came back, and took one look at her face and the particular set of her shoulders, and said nothing except "Supper's warm." Eleanor ate. She slept. She lay in the dark ceiling watching and told herself she was being careful and sensible and that slow decisions were good decisions. She was also, she acknowledged privately, beginning to understand what it felt like to want to stop moving, which was terrifying, which meant it was probably true. Harlan Voss arrived in Black Ridge himself 3 days later. Eleanor was in Finch's store when he walked in, and she knew immediately who he was because he was dressed for money and moved like someone who had never in his adult life been required to adjust his pace for anyone else. 45, maybe 50. Not physically imposing medium height, lean, a face that had probably been charming 20 years ago and had since settled into something more calculated. He wore a suit that had no place in a frontier town and didn't care. He bought nothing. He simply walked through the store with the particular attention of a man taking inventory, not of goods but of people. His eyes moved across Eleanor the way eyes moved across furniture. She was present. She was noted. She had no significance. She watched him go. Harold Finch appeared at her elbow. "That's him," Finch murmured. "I know," she said quietly. Voss spent 3 days in Black Ridge. He stayed at the one hotel, took his meals in the dining room, and had conversations with almost every significant property owner in the valley. Eleanor heard about these conversations secondhand, through Mabel, Through Patricia. Through the ranching wives who came in for fittings and brought news with them the way women in small towns always carried news mixed in with everything else, offered as incidentally as salt at a table. What she heard was this: Voss was offering good money. Not quite what properties were worth, but close enough that men with struggling operations heard it as attractive. He framed it as opportunity. The valley was going to be developed. One way or another, he said, and the smart move was to be on the right side of the transaction before the railroad got involved. The railroad. She heard that word and something clicked behind her eyes. She went to the county clerk, records the public ones, available to any citizen, and spent a morning in the courthouse in Larrabee that she told Patricia she needed for a personal errand, which was accurate enough. What she found confirmed everything. A federal right-of-way survey had been commissioned 6 months ago for a potential rail line running through the Wyoming Valley territories. The proposed corridor followed the high valley floor, which meant it would pass within 2 miles of Black Ridge. The land along the proposed corridor, if the railroad confirmed its route, would multiply in value within 3 to 5 years. Voss wasn't buying struggling farms. He was assembling a land package along a future railroad corridor, and he needed the mountain plateau Cole's property, because whoever controlled that elevation controlled the water access to the entire lower corridor. Without it, any development project in the valley was vulnerable. With it, you owned the region. Eleanor sat in the courthouse with this understanding settling through her like cold water finding the cracks in stone. She had 6 pages of notes when she came out. She rode directly up to the mountain. Cole was in the south pasture with 2 of his crew, and when he saw her riding hard up the access road, he broke away and met her halfway. She dismounted, gave him the notes, watched him read. She watched his face change, not dramatically. Cole Maverick did not do dramatic, but she had become fluent over 2 months. In the small shifts of his expression, the slight tightening around the eyes, that meant he was recalibrating something important. The way his jaw set when he understood a problem's full dimensions. He needs the mountain access, Cole said. Without it, the corridor development doesn't work the way he needs it to. He can buy every farm in the valley, but if your water access holds, his project is compromised. She took back her notes. That's why the deed challenge. It's not really about 300 yards of boundary line. It's about establishing legal uncertainty about your northeast water rights so that he can apply pressure. Financial pressure, legal pressure, maybe other kinds until you'd rather sell than fight. He doesn't know we've filed the adjacent claim yet, Cole said. Not yet. He will when it processes publicly. We have maybe a week before that happens. Cole turned to look back at his land. She watched him. There was a long silence that was not empty. It was the silence of a man thinking through something that had many layers, pulling each one apart carefully. When he finds out, Cole said slowly, he'll come after the claim. He'll look into who filed it. He'll find out it's you. Yes, he'll find out you're connected to this ranch. Yes, Cole looked at her. Eleanor, he said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard there before, not the careful patience, not the contained warmth. Something rawer. If he decides you're an obstacle, then I'm an obstacle, she said. Cole, listen to me. She stepped forward so he had to meet her eyes directly. I have been maneuvered out of 2 homes already. I watched a man take everything my husband built because I didn't understand the legal mechanisms being used against us until it was too late. She held his gaze. I understand them now. I filed that claim with my eyes open. And I am not backing away from it because a man in an expensive suit is going to be displeased. His expression did the unguarded thing again. You're not afraid of him, Cole said. I'm afraid of a lot of things, she said honestly. I'm afraid of losing things I care about. I'm afraid of trusting wrong. I'm afraid of waking up in 3 years in another town with another suitcase. She didn't look away. I am not afraid of Harlan Voss. A muscle moved in his jaw. Then he did something she didn't expect. He reached out and put his hand over hers just once, briefly covering her hand where it held her notebook of notes, and then let go. All right, he said. All right, she said. Then we need to tell the other valley landholders what we know. Before Voss gets to all of them. I've been thinking about that, she said. If we go to them one at a time, he'll find out and start working against us. We need to get them all in a room at the same time. Cole nodded slowly. Finch has the largest back room in town, he said. And Finch loves nothing more than being at the center of something important, she said. The beginning of the quiet smile. I'll talk to him, Cole said. I'll prepare the documents, she said. They both started moving. Then Cole stopped and turned back. Eleanor, She turned. "Thank you," he said. And then, as if it cost him something to say it, I don't know how to do this with someone else. I've always done it alone. I'm going to get it wrong sometimes." She looked at him. Something in her chest that had been held tightly for a very long time shifted, just a fraction. "So will I," she said. "We'll correct each other when it happens." He held her eyes, nodded, turned back toward the house. And Eleanor Dawson stood on the mountain in October light and realized that the thing she had been most afraid of had already happened. She had begun to trust him, and the sky had not fallen, and the ground was still solid under her feet, and she was still, definitively, herself. Which was not what she'd expected. Which was, she thought, exactly the point. She gathered her notes and went to work. The meeting at Finch's store happened 4 days later, on a Tuesday evening, when most of the valley's ranch families came to town for their weekly supplies. 11 property owners, 7 men, 3 women who represented households where the husband was ill or absent, and 1 widow named Clara Hennessy, who owned the 12 acres adjacent to Cole's southern boundary and who had, Eleanor learned, already received a visit from Voss's man Aldridge. Eleanor stood at the front of the room. She had not planned to speak. She had planned to sit beside Cole and provide documentation when asked and let him lead the conversation, because he was the one they all knew and she was still, in most of their minds, the woman who'd arrived 2 months ago with a busted suitcase and a bruised jaw. But Cole had introduced her as the person who'd uncovered the full scope of what was happening, and 11 sets of eyes had turned to her, and she had understood, in that moment, that she could defer and spend the next 6 months being the woman in the background, or she could stand up and be the person who knew what she knew. She stood up. "Harlan Voss is not interested in your farms," she said. "He is interested in one thing: assembling a contiguous land package along the proposed Federal Railroad corridor that is currently being surveyed approximately 2 miles east of Black Ridge." The room was silent. She walked them through it: the railroad survey, the corridor, the land values that would result, the strategy Voss was using: buy from the willing, find legal leverage against the unwilling, and use the mountain plateau as the linchpin, because without controlling the water access, the whole package was incomplete. She put Cole's deed documents on the table, the adjacent claim paperwork, the courthouse records she'd copied. "He doesn't want to live here," she said. "He wants to sell the package to railroad developers for 20 times what he pays for it. And every one of you who sells at his price will sell at a fraction of what your land will be worth in 5 years. Clara Hennessy raised her hand. "Why didn't he just tell us about the railroad?" she said. "If values are going up, because if you know values are going up, you don't sell at his price," Eleanor said. "He needs you to believe you're selling at a fair rate now, before anyone understands what the corridor confirmation will mean." A man named Garfield, one of the Mid-Valley ranchers, shook his head. "He offered me $800 for my East 40 acres, Garfield said. "That's fair money." "It's fair money today," Cole said from the side of the room. He had let Eleanor lead, and now he added the weight of his presence behind what she'd said. "In 3 years, that 40 acres, if it's in the corridor, could be worth 4,000. The room absorbed that. It was not an abstract conversation anymore. Eleanor watched it land across 11 faces: the calculation, the anger, the relief that they'd found out before signing, the wariness of people who had been careful enough to wait. "What do we do?" Clara Hennessy asked. "First, nobody signs anything," Eleanor said. "If you've already received an offer letter, don't respond yet. Second, there's a land attorney in Larrabee named Dinchison who handles property law. I've already written to him. He can advise on the legal standing of every property claim in this room and identify if any of you have the same deed irregularities that Voss's people are using against the Maverick Ranch." She looked around the room. "Third, we stay in communication. If anyone gets pressure, not just offers, but pressure, they tell Cole or they tell me immediately. We don't let him separate us and work on us one at a time." She sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Harold Finch, standing behind his own counter in his own store, with an expression of considerable satisfaction, said, "Well, I'd say that covers it." The meeting went another hour. People asked questions. Eleanor answered what she could, and was honest about what she didn't know. Cole answered the land questions. He knew this territory the way he knew his own hands, and the ranchers trusted him the way they trusted terrain. By the end, nobody in that room was selling to Harlan Voss. By the end, Eleanor Dawson had stopped being the woman who had arrived 2 months ago and had started being something else. Something she hadn't been since Kansas, Since the one-room schoolhouse. Since the time in her life before everything had been taken. Someone people counted on. The walk back to the boarding house was cold and clear, and Cole walked beside her without being asked to, which she noted and did not comment on. "You were extraordinary in there," he said. "I was prepared," she said. "There's a difference between being prepared and what you did in there." "You know there is." She was quiet for a moment. "Voss is going to find out about this meeting by morning," she said. "Finch will tell someone who will tell someone who will tell someone who works for Voss. Probably. And then he's going to come after the adjacent claim directly. He'll try to find a reason to invalidate it." She paused. "Or he'll come after me," Cole slowed. She kept walking. He caught up. "He won't touch you," Cole said. "Cole, I'm not saying it as a threat. I'm saying it as information." His voice was very quiet and very certain. "Because the moment he moves against you, he turns every person in that room into an enemy. He's a businessman. He understands leverage. He won't make that move." "You don't," he said. "I don't." A pause. "Which is why I'm going to ask you again, and this time it's not about what I want. It's about what makes sense practically." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "Come up to the ranch, properly. I've got a room separate, private, nothing untoward, and you'd be on the property every day anyway. Mabel can tell anyone who asks it's a professional arrangement. And if Voss or anyone he sends decides to apply pressure, they'd have to come through me to get to you." She looked at him in the dark street. "That's a practical argument," she said. "It's the only kind I'm comfortable making right now," he said. "Given what you told me about spring." She almost smiled. She was very tired of almost smiling. "Let me talk to Mabel," she said. "That's all I'm asking." She looked at him for one more moment. This man who had built 12 windows facing the light, who had sold horses below market to help a family through a hard winter and put it nowhere in his records because he hadn't done it to be recorded, who had sat across a desk for 2 hours and let her think without interference and trusted what she reached. "Cole," she said. When I said spring," she paused. "I didn't mean I need that long." He went very still. She kept her eyes forward. "I said I needed time to be sure," she said. "I'm beginning to be sure," she paused. "I'm not there yet, but I'm beginning." The night was cold and clear above them, all the Wyoming stars laid out overhead in the dark. Cole Maverick said nothing for a moment. "Then I can work with beginning." "Good," she said. "Yeah," he said. They walked the rest of the way to the boarding house in the particular silence of two people who have said the important thing and don't need to say anything else on top of it. At the porch steps she stopped. "Good night, Cole," she said. "Good night, Eleanor," he said. She went inside. Through the window, she watched him walk back up the street, unhurried, solid, the largest person in the town, moving through the dark like a man who knew exactly where he was going and was in no rush to get there and had, perhaps for the first time in a long time, somewhere he wanted to be on the other end. Mabel was sitting in the kitchen with her tea. "I might need to have a conversation with you," Eleanor said. "Sit down," Mabel said. "About a professional arrangement." "Sit down," Mabel said more warmly this time. Eleanor sat down. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Mabel slid toward her and felt the heat of it travel up through her palms. Outside, the October wind came down off the mountain and pressed against the windows with something that almost sounded like patience. And somewhere up that mountain, in a house with 12 windows, a man was riding back alone for what both of them were beginning to understand might be one of the last times. And somewhere up that mountain, in a house with 12 windows, a man was riding back alone for what both of them were beginning to understand might be one of the last times. But before that could become true, the world had other plans. And the world, as Eleanor had learned, rarely waited for people to be ready before it moved against them. Harlan Voss requested a meeting with Cole Maverick the very next morning. The request came through Finch's store, a sealed note delivered by Aldridge, the city man who had been in town for a week now, moving through it with the patient certainty of someone executing a plan that had already been decided. The note was formal, brief, and framed as a professional courtesy. Voss would be grateful for 30 minutes of Mr. Maverick's time. He had a proposition that Mr. Maverick might find worth hearing before making any decisions about his property's future. Cole brought the note to Eleanor at Patricia's shop without opening it first. She looked at the fact that he'd brought it to her before reading it himself, and understood what it meant without either of them having to say it. She read it, set it on the work table. "He knows about the meeting at Finch's," she said. "He's moving faster than I expected. What do you want me to do?" "Go," she said. "Meet with him, listen to everything he says and agree to nothing." Cole looked at her. "You want me to bring you with me," he said. "I want you to bring me with you," she said. "He won't like that." "Good," she said. They sent word back through Aldridge that Cole Maverick would meet that afternoon at the hotel, and that his accounts manager would be accompanying him in a professional capacity. Eleanor spent the morning at the courthouse in Larrabee. She'd taken to keeping a horse rather than waiting for Cole to send one down, which Mabel had noted approvingly, and Cole had arranged without comment, pulling every public record on Harlan Voss that existed in the Wyoming Territory filing system. What she found was considerable. Voss had executed 14 land acquisitions in the past 3 years across 4 counties. In 11 of those 14 cases, the original property holder had sold below estimated value. In 3 cases, the sale had followed legal action. In 2 of those 3 cases, the legal action had involved deed challenges, remarkably similar to what Voss's people were attempting with Cole's northeast boundary. In one of those cases in Carbon County 2 years prior, the challenged property had been a ranch of roughly comparable size to Cole's. The owner had fought the challenge, spent 18 months in legal proceedings, and ultimately won, but had sold the property anyway, at a reduced rate, because 18 months of legal fees had broken him financially, even though he'd been right. That was the play, not to win in court, to make fighting too expensive to sustain. Eleanor brought these records rolled under her arm when they rode to the hotel that afternoon. Voss was waiting in the hotel's small dining room, which had been cleared of other guests by some means Eleanor didn't examine closely. Aldridge stood at the back of the room. A second man Eleanor hadn't seen before, younger, carrying a leather document case, sat to Voss's right. Voss stood when they entered. His eyes moved to Eleanor and held there for half a second longer than was neutral. "Mr. Maverick," he said, "thank you for your time." Mr. Cole pulled out a chair for Eleanor. She sat. Cole sat beside her. He didn't shake Voss's hand. He didn't offer any pleasantry beyond the name. "Say what you came to say." Voss sat back down. Something in his expression adjusted, not quite annoyance, more like recalculation. "I'll be direct," Voss said. "I have a significant investment interest in this valley. The development potential here is substantial, and I'm in a position to offer prices that reflect future value, not just current agricultural assessment." "How much?" Cole said. Voss named a number. It was a large number. Eleanor watched Cole's face, not a flicker. "That's your opening," Cole said. "What's your ceiling?" Voss almost smiled. "I have flexibility." "How much flexibility?" Voss named a second number, 15% higher. Cole looked at the table, then at Voss. "Mr. Voss," he said, "I built that ranch board by board, fence post by fence post, over 10 years. I've got 1,200 acres in production and a water system that runs year-round. I've got a house I built myself." He paused. "Your ceiling is still 40% below what that land will be worth in 3 years, once the railroad corridor is confirmed." The room went quiet in a particular way. Voss's expression didn't change, but his hands, folded on the table, shifted a small movement, the kind that meant someone was making an internal adjustment. "I don't know what you've heard about a railroad corridor," Voss said carefully. Eleanor opened her document roll. "Federal Right-of-Way Survey Commission Record Number 1889 WYD47, she said. She placed the copied document on the table and turned it to face Voss. "Filed in March of this year. The proposed corridor comes within 2 miles of Black Ridge. The confirmation hearing is scheduled for February." She looked up. "We know what you're building, Mr. Voss. We know why you need the mountain plateau. And we know that without water access rights to the upper valley, which are attached to Mr. Maverick's property and protected under the adjacent landholding clause in his original deed, your development package is incomplete." She placed the adjacent claim filing on top of the railroad document. "We also know that the adjacent northeast parcel, which your surveyors were examining last week, has already been claimed by me, filed 6 days ago at the Larrabee County office." She folded her hands. "You no longer have a path to a deed challenge, because the standing required for that challenge would need to come from an adjacent landholder, and I am now that adjacent landholder, and I have no intention of challenging Mr. Maverick's deed." Voss looked at the documents. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Cole. "Who are you?" he said to Eleanor. Quietly. The way someone says it, when they mean something slightly different. "Eleanor Dawson," she said, "accounts manager for the Maverick Ranch, and legal claimant of record for the northeast parcel. And your connection to Mr. Maverick is professional," she said, "and complete." Voss studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the young man with the document case and said one word outside, and the young man stood and left. Aldridge remained, but against the back wall, out of the circle of the conversation. Voss leaned forward. "Miss Dawson," he said, "I want to be clear with you about something." "Mrs." she said. "And please do. I've been building projects in this territory for 7 years. I've had deals go sideways before. I've had legal challenges, competing claims, community organization." He paused. "I've never failed to complete an acquisition I committed to. Not once." He let that sit. "I'm offering you both something fair. Something that lets you walk away with real money and no fight. The alternative." He stopped. "Go ahead," Cole said. His voice was quiet and even, and carried the specific weight of a man who has decided not to be moved and has the mass to back it up. Voss looked at him. "The alternative is 18 months of legal challenge during which your operating costs continue while your legal costs mount. Even if you win, and I want to be honest, the deed question is a real question, not a manufactured one you'll have spent money and time that your operation may not be able to absorb. Or," Eleanor said, "we could resolve the deed irregularity through a formal correction, filing at the state land office, which is a standard procedure for 1,879 Laramie clerk errors, and which 4 other Valley property holders are also filing this week." She pulled another document from her roll. "I've already drafted the correction filing. Attorney Jensen in Larrabee has agreed to certify it. The correction process takes 6 weeks and costs considerably less than 18 months of litigation." She placed the draft filing in front of Voss. He didn't look at it. He was looking at her. "You prepared all of this," he said. "Yes, before this meeting." "Yes, that's." He stopped. He picked up the draft filing. He read it. His expression for the first time showed something she recognized, because she had seen it before in rooms dominated by men who had been outmaneuvered, a kind of recalibration that tried to look like contemplation. He set it down. "I'd like to make a different kind of offer," he said. Cole's chin lifted slightly. "I have interests across 6 counties, Voss said. The kind of analytical work you've done here, the research, the legal framework, the strategic preparation that's not ranch accounting." He looked directly at Eleanor. "I pay well for people who can do this kind of work." Eleanor felt Cole go very still beside her. She kept her face exactly as it was. "Mr. Voss," she said, "I appreciate that you've reframed your position, but I want to be clear about something. You're not making me a professional offer. You're trying to determine whether I can be separated from Mr. Maverick's interests." "The answer is no." She stood up. Cole stood with her. "We came here to hear your proposal and to be direct about our position. We've done both. If you'd like to make a legitimate offer for the Maverick Ranch at actual market value, accounting for the projected corridor effect, you're welcome to put it in writing and we'll consider it." She picked up her documents. "Otherwise, I think we're done." Voss stayed seated. "The correction filing," he said. "If Jensen certifies it, that closes the deed question permanently." "Permanently," she said. He was quiet. "Then you've made your position very clear," he said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man updating his calculations in real time. "I'll be in touch." "We'll be here," Cole said. They walked out. In the street outside the hotel, they walked half a block before Eleanor let out a breath that she'd been holding for approximately 40 minutes. Cole walked beside her. He didn't say anything immediately, which she'd come to understand was how he processed significant events. He needed to turn them over once before he spoke. "You brought the correction filing draft," he said finally. "Jensen and I worked on it this morning. You didn't tell me. I didn't know if I'd need it. I didn't want to get your hopes up before I knew it was viable." Cole stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "Eleanor," he said. She turned. He looked at her directly, openly, in the way that was becoming familiar, and still managed to catch her without her armor fully up. "You just walked into a room with a man who has destroyed 11 ranches in 4 counties, he said. "And you took him apart piece by piece with a stack of documents and a level voice." "I was prepared," she said. "Stop saying that," he said. "Stop giving the preparation the credit. You knew what he was going to do before he did it, and you had the answers ready, and you sat in that room and didn't flinch once." His voice was low and certain. "That's not preparation. That's who you are." She looked at him. The street was empty around them, the October afternoon sharp and clear. "Don't make me larger than I am," she said quietly. "I'm not," he said. "I'm seeing you the size you actually are." A pause. "You're not used to that." She looked away first. "We need to tell the Valley landholders about the correction filing," she said. "If they can all file simultaneously, Eleanor. And we should write to Jensen today about the timeline." "Eleanor," he stepped into her line of sight. Can we just for 1 minute not talk about documents? She stopped. She looked at him. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to control because she was tired suddenly of controlling everything. He scared me a little, she admitted, very quietly. In the room, not his offer. The way he looked at me when he understood what I'd done, like I'd become a problem he needed to solve. Cole's jaw tightened. He's not going to touch you, he said. You keep saying that. Because I keep meaning it. She pressed her lips together. I know, she said. But Cole men like Voss don't stop when the first move fails. They find a different way. She met his eyes. I want you to understand that this isn't over. The correction filing will help. But he has resources we don't, and he's patient, and he's done this before. So have you, Cole said, in a manner of speaking. She almost laughed. It surprised her. I've had things taken from me, she said. That's different from being the person who does the taking. No, he said. It means you know every move he's going to make before he makes it because you've been on the receiving end of all of them. He held her gaze. That's not a liability, Eleanor. That's the advantage. She stood in the October afternoon and let that be true for a moment. Then she straightened. Jensen's office closes at 4, she said. Then we better move, he said. They moved. The correction filing went to Jensen that afternoon. By Friday, 4 other Valley property holders, including Clara Hennessy, who had turned out to have a similar Laramie clerk error in her own 1,879 deed, had agreed to file simultaneously. Jensen wrote to the State Land Office in Cheyenne. The process was underway, and Harlan Voss was still in Black Ridge. He was quiet for 4 days. He took his meals at the hotel, walked the town, had conversations that people reported back to Eleanor. Through the network of careful attention she had established, Patricia, Mabel, Finch, Clara, 3 ranch wives who had their own reasons to pay attention. Nothing overt, nothing that could be called pressure. Just a presence, patient and watchful, like a man who had adjusted his approach and was waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Eleanor didn't trust the quiet. She was right not to. On a Thursday evening, 11 days after the hotel meeting, one of Cole's ranch hands, a young man named Pete Darrow, who had been with the operation for 2 years, came into Black Ridge and asked at the boarding house for Eleanor specifically. She came down to find him at the door, hat in hand, with an expression she didn't like. What happened? She said immediately. Pete looked past her into the hallway, then back at her. Mr. Maverick sent me, he said. He didn't want to alarm you, but I think you need to come up. What happened? She said again. Someone cut the fence line on the northeast pasture, Pete said, where your claim is filed. Cut it clean, ran the cattle through, and they're mixed up now with stock from we don't know whose stock. Unbranded animals. If we can't sort it out by morning, the county livestock authority is going to have to come in, and that means a formal dispute over which animals are ours, and Eleanor had her coat on before he finished. Get the horses, she said. She left a note for Mabel that said she was going to the ranch, took the stairs 2 at a time to get her document case, and was in the saddle in 4 minutes flat. The ride up took 35 minutes in the dark. Pete ahead with the lantern. Cole met her at the barn. He was already in his work clothes, face set in the particular way that meant he'd been angry for a while and had moved through it into something harder and colder. How many animals? She said, dismounting. 40, maybe 50 unknown head mixed into my north herd. My men are trying to separate, but without daylight and without brands on the unknowns. He stopped. Whoever drove them in knew exactly where the fence line for your claim parcel is. They drove them through that specific section. Because if the animals are on the claim parcel, Eleanor said, following his thought, and they're unbranded, there's a question about whether the parcel is being actively managed as claimed. It's a challenge to the claim's validity. That's what I think. A formal livestock dispute would bring county authority review of the claim itself. Yes, she set her document case down on the porch railing. Can your men have the fence repaired before dawn? She said. If they work through the night, then that's what they do. And we document every unbranded animal, brand descriptions, physical markings, age estimates, everything before the county man can get here. She turned to Pete. Can you write legibly? Yes, ma'am. Good, you're my recorder. Cole, I need your 2 most experienced men on that herd identification. We need to be able to walk the livestock authority through exactly which animals are yours and show that the unknowns were deliberately driven in. She looked at Cole. This is manufactured evidence of claim abandonment. If we document it properly, it becomes evidence of interference. Cole stared at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Just keeping up. Then let's go. They worked through the night. Cole's crew repaired the fence line. Eleanor and Pete moved through the north herd by lantern light, documenting everything. Cole's animals were all branded with the Maverick M mark. Year of branding recorded in a system Eleanor had implemented in September, clean and verifiable. The unknowns were a different matter, rough animals, thin, no brands, which told Eleanor something important. These animals are thin, she said to Cole. Around midnight, the two of them standing in the field while Pete finished the last tally sheet. Their range run, Cole agreed. Nobody's been feeding them grain. They've been out. Out where? Cole looked at the animals. The territory north of here, he said slowly. Federal open range, nobody claims it. So someone found 40 unbranded animals on open range, Eleanor said. Gathered them, drove them here, cut your fence, and released them specifically on the northeast parcel. Someone who knew where the parcel boundary was. Someone who had access to the survey information. They looked at each other in the lantern light. Aldridge, Cole said. Aldridge, Eleanor agreed. Which means Voss ordered it and Aldridge executed it. She looked at her documentation. Which also means Voss is more threatened by the correction filing than he showed in the hotel. Cole's expression hardened. He's not just trying to buy us out anymore, he said. He's trying to manufacture a reason to challenge the claim before the correction filing goes through. The correction filing is 6 weeks out, Eleanor said. He needs to create enough legal noise in those 6 weeks that Jensen gets buried in response work and the filing gets delayed. She closed her document folder. We need to move faster. How Jensen needs to know about this tonight. Or first thing tomorrow. And we need to file a report with the County Livestock Authority before Voss does frame this as interference, not as a dispute. She looked at him. If we file first, we're the aggrieved party. If Voss files first, we're the respondents. Cole turned to Pete. Ride to Jensen's house, he said. I don't care what time it is. Tell him what happened and tell him Miss Dawson needs to speak with him first thing in the morning. Pete was in the saddle before the sentence was finished. Cole turned back to Eleanor. She was looking at the herd. The documentation folder pressed against her chest, and he watched her face in the lantern light, the tiredness there, the concentration, and underneath both of those, something else. Something she was working to keep from showing. Eleanor, he said. I'm fine, she said. You've been awake for I'm fine, Cole. I know you are. Not invasive, just present. I know you're fine. You are capable of operating on no sleep with a legal crisis in progress, and I have no doubt of it. He paused. I'm asking anyway. She looked at him. The lantern moved in a breath of wind. I'm angry, she said quietly. I keep thinking Voss sat across that table and looked me in the eye, and even while he was doing it, he was planning this. He was going to do this regardless of what I said or didn't say. She pressed her lips together. I keep thinking that if I'd been better, faster, smarter. No, Cole said. His voice was firm without being hard. You couldn't have prevented this by being smarter. Voss was going to use every tool available to him, regardless of how well you prepared. That is on you. He held her eyes. You can be angry at him. Don't be angry at yourself for not being perfect. She was quiet. That's harder than it sounds, she said. I know, he said. I've been doing the same thing for 10 years. Every time something on this ranch went wrong, I went through the list of what I should have done differently. Wore myself out blaming myself for weather and bad luck and other people's decisions. He paused. Didn't help anything, still happened. All it did was make me carry it alone. The night was cold and still. In the pasture, the cattle moved and shifted, settling for the night. You're not alone in this, she said. Not as a comfort, as a statement of fact. No, he said. I'm not. He said it like something he was still getting used to and finding cautiously that he liked. She took a breath. 3 more hours until dawn, she said. Come inside. We've got what we need from the herd. My men will finish the fence, the documentation. Is done. Pete took it. He moved toward the house. Come inside. She followed him. Inside the ranch house, in the warmth of the kitchen, Cole made coffee the way people made it on working ranches, strong enough to stand without a cup, and Eleanor sat at the kitchen table and let herself be still for the first time in 12 hours. She had been in this kitchen many times in the past 2 months, but always during working hours, always moving between the side room and the porch, always with purpose and direction. Sitting in it at 2 in the morning, with coffee and a man across the table, was different. It felt, she thought, like what the house had been designed for. He was watching her without staring the way he did everything, attentive, without being intrusive. Tell me something, she said. What kind of something? Not about Voss, not about the ranch. She wrapped both hands around the cup. Just something. He thought about it. My mother used to say that a house that didn't argue wasn't a home, he said. She and my father argued about everything: where to put the table, which way the garden should face, whether the dog should be inside or outside. He looked at the table. They were arguing the morning she died. Nothing serious: which road to take to town. She wanted the long way, he wanted the short. She took the long way, he paused. The bridge on the short road washed out that afternoon. If she'd taken the short road, Eleanor was quiet. He never argued about anything small again after that, Cole said. He'd just say whichever way you want, and I understood what he meant by it. He looked up. I understand it better now. She looked at him across the table. How did you end up out here? She said. On this mountain specifically. I came out from Ohio at 23 with $200, and the idea that a man could make himself into something if he found the right piece of land. He smiled slightly at the memory. The mountain was the only parcel I could afford that had water. Everything else was cheaper and drier. He paused. I figured water mattered more than anything. Turns out I was right about that one thing. And the house took 4 years to build. I had it in my head exactly. I knew what it needed to be before I started. I just needed the time and the material. You knew what you wanted. I've always known what I wanted, he said, quietly, looking at her directly. What I wanted was never the question. She held his gaze. I know, he said. Not yet, I'm close, she said, to being ready. I know that too, he said. The timing is terrible, she said. With Voss still, the timing is what it is, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded. The coffee was warm in her hands. Outside, the night was pressing toward gray at its edges, the dark thinning toward a dawn that would bring another day of fighting for something worth fighting for. When this is over, she said. When it's over, he agreed. They sat in the kitchen of the house, with 12 windows, and waited for the morning. At 6 o'clock, Pete Darrow came back from Jensen's with the attorney's response. Jensen had already drafted an interference complaint based on Pete's account and was prepared to file it with the County Livestock Authority the moment Eleanor reviewed and signed it. He had also, on his own initiative, written a letter directly to the State Land Office in Cheyenne, flagging Voss's pattern of deed challenges across 4 counties and formally requesting expedited review of the correction filing, given what appeared to be a campaign of deliberate obstruction. Eleanor read both documents at the kitchen table, while Cole stood at the window watching the dawn come up over his land. Jensen's good, she said. I know, Cole said. I just never gave him enough to work with before. You have enough now. She signed both documents. Cole witnessed them. Pete rode back to Larrabee. It was 7 in the morning. Eleanor had not slept. Cole looked at her. Spare room, he said. 3 hours. The world will still be the same level of complicated when you wake up. She was going to argue. She didn't. She slept for 3 hours in the spare room of a house with 12 windows, in a bed that had probably never been slept in. And when she woke, she lay still for a minute, listening to the sounds of the ranch, around her, men working, horses moving, the particular alive quality of a place with purpose, and thought that she could not remember the last time she had woken up without dread. She got up. She went back to work. Jensen filed both documents by noon. The interference complaint changed the landscape immediately. The County Livestock Authority, now formally notified, could not be used as a weapon by Voss without appearing to be part of the interference pattern that had already been documented. The State Land Office, with Jensen's letter on the expedited review, moved the correction filing up the queue. Voss remained in Black Ridge. He was quieter now, more contained. Eleanor saw him twice in the street during the following week, once outside Finch's store, once near the hotel, and he looked at her each time with the expression she had started to understand as his version of respect, which was distinct from anything warm and meant only that he had recalibrated how difficult she was going to be. She did not feel reassured by it. She felt, instead, the particular tension of someone who knew the first attack had failed and was waiting to find out what the second one looked like. It came from a direction she hadn't expected. On a Saturday in late October, a letter arrived at the boarding house addressed to Eleanor Dawson. No return address, postmarked Cheyenne. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On the paper were 3 lines. Your land filing in Larrabee County is based on residence established October 4th. Your prior residence in Cheyenne-Laramie County was vacated under legal order dated September 28th. The 6-day gap in established residency may affect the validity of your filing. Someone with an interest in this matter is reviewing this question. Eleanor read the note twice. She sat down. She read it a third time. The 6-day gap. She had left her sister's house in Cheyenne on September 28th. She had arrived in Black Ridge and registered at Mabel's on October 4th. 6 days of travel. No address. Under Wyoming residency requirements for land filing, an applicant needed to demonstrate continuous established residence. 6 days of transit between addresses was not unusual. But it was a gap, and if someone with legal resources chose to argue that her residence had not been continuous at the time of filing. She folded the note. She put on her coat. She walked downstairs. Mabel was in the kitchen. "I need to borrow your wagon," Eleanor said. "I need to go to Larrabee." Mabel looked at her face. "I'll have Sam hitch it," she said. Eleanor got to Larrabee in an hour. She went directly to Jensen's office. She put the note on his desk. He read it. He was quiet for a moment. "Sit down, Mrs. Dawson," he said. She sat. "This is a real question," he said. "I want to be honest with you. The 6-day residency gap is a genuine legal vulnerability." She felt the cold thing in her stomach again. However, Jensen said, there are 3 things that matter here. First, the gap is 6 days of travel, which courts in this territory have consistently treated as continuous residency. For filing purposes, you weren't a resident of nowhere. You were in transit. Second, I'm going to need documentation of that transit. Hotel records, way station logs, anything that establishes where you were on those 6 days. He leaned forward. Third, and this is important, someone sent you this note instead of filing a formal challenge. That means they're not sure this argument will hold. They're testing whether it will scare you into withdrawing the claim voluntarily. Eleanor sat with that. "They want me to pull the claim myself," she said. "That's my read. Because if I withdraw it, Voss gets the northeast parcel without a legal fight. And without the fight, there's no record of interference, no pattern of obstruction, and the deed challenge can proceed quietly." "Yes," Jensen said. Eleanor's hands were folded in her lap. "I have hotel records from Laramie," she said. "I stayed one night. And I have a receipt from a way station outside of Rollins. I bought feed for the horse I was traveling with." She looked at Jensen. "Is that enough?" Jensen picked up a pen. "It might be. I'll need to move fast. Can you get me those documents today?" "I have them in my bag," she said. She had stopped traveling without documentation of where she'd been. Old habit. The habit of a woman who had learned that her word, alone, was rarely considered sufficient. She opened her bag. She placed the Laramie Hotel receipt and the Rollins Way station paper on Jensen's desk. He looked at them. He looked at her. "You carry these everywhere," he said. "I carry everything everywhere," she said. "I learned a long time ago that if you can't prove where you've been, someone will decide for you." Jensen looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked up. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "in 20 years of property law in this territory, I have never had a client walk into my office with exactly the documentation I needed already in their bag." "Then I hope that's the last time you're surprised by it," she said. He almost smiled. "I'm going to file a residency confirmation brief by end of day," he said. "This challenge, if it ever becomes a formal challenge, is not going to succeed. But I want it on record before anyone can move." "Thank you," she said. She stood. She put her coat on. She was at the door when Jensen said, "Mrs. Dawson." She turned. "What's driving this?" he said quietly. "Not the legal question. The why. Why are you fighting this hard for a 15-acre parcel that isn't yours yet and a ranch that isn't yours at all?" Eleanor stood in the doorway of the attorney's office in Larrabee, Wyoming, in the last week of October 1889, and thought about the question. "Because the first time I lost something," she said, "I didn't understand what was being done until it was done. And I promised myself that would never happen again." She paused. "And because the man on that mountain built something worth protecting. And he shouldn't have to protect it alone." Jensen nodded slowly. "That's a good enough reason," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She walked out into the afternoon. She stood in the Larrabee street and let the cold air hit her face and thought about 12 windows and a kitchen table at 2 in the morning and a man who said, "I can work with beginning," and meant every word of it. Then she got back in the wagon and drove toward the mountain. Because there was still work to do, and she was not done yet. Not even close. And she was not done yet, not even close, because the wagon had barely cleared the edge of Larrabee when she saw the rider coming toward her from the direction of Black Ridge. Moving fast, and she knew before she could see his face that something had happened. It was Pete Darrow. He pulled his horse up hard beside the wagon, and his face told her everything she needed to know before he opened his mouth. He was breathing hard. "Mr. Maverick sent me. You need to come back fast. What happened, Voss? He went up to the ranch. Eleanor's hands tightened on the reins. 2 hours ago. Rode up himself, just him and Aldridge. Mr. Maverick let them in, because Pete stopped. Steadied himself, because Voss told him he had new documentation. Something about the original 1899 claim. Something he says proves the filing wasn't just incorrect. He says it was fraudulent. The word landed like a stone through ice. Fraudulent, Eleanor repeated. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Maverick told him to get out. Voss left. But before he left, he said he'd be filing a formal fraud complaint with the Territorial Land Office by end of week. Pete held her eyes. Mr. Maverick didn't send for me right away. He sat with it for an hour first. I don't think he wanted to. He stopped again. He didn't want to alarm me, Eleanor said. Yes, ma'am. She turned the wagon around in the road. Keep up, she said, and drove hard. Cole was on the porch when she arrived. He was sitting on the top step with his elbows on his knees and his hat pushed back, which was the posture she had come to recognize as the one he took when he was holding something heavy and had run out of places to set it down. He looked up when she came through the gate, and something in his face, the particular effort he'd been making to keep it composed, eased slightly, which told her more than anything else how the last 2 hours had been. She tied the horse and came up the steps and sat down beside him. Tell me what he said, she said. Exactly, every word. Cole looked at his hands. He came in polite, he said. Sat down, he put a document on the table, a copy, not the original. He said it was a letter from the Laramie Land Office. 1,879. From the clerk who processed my claim. He paused. He said the clerk, a man named Hooper, who died in 1882, had been under investigation for a period of that year for processing claims in exchange for fees paid outside the normal filing costs. Under the table, he stopped. Voss's position is that my claim was processed improperly because Hooper took a side payment to prioritize it, which would make the original filing fraudulent, Eleanor said. In legal terms. She was quiet for a moment. Did you pay anything outside the filing fee? She said. Not as an accusation, as information she needed. Cole looked at her directly. No, he said, I paid the standard fee, $12. I have the receipt. Do you have it here? I've had it in a file since the day I paid it. He paused. I keep everything. I learned that from my father. He said a man who can't prove what he paid for deserves to lose it. Something loosened slightly in Eleanor's chest. Then Voss is doing one of two things, she said. Either he has documentation that Hooper processed your claim during the investigation period and is hoping enough to raise fraud questions regardless of what you paid, or he's manufactured something, or partially manufactured something, taken a real fact and extended it past what it can actually support. How do we find out which? We need the original Hooper investigation records, she said. They'd be in the Territorial Archive in Cheyenne, and we need them fast if he files a fraud complaint by end of week. We need to have our response already built before the Territorial Land Office even opens the file. Cole stood up. He went inside. He came back with a tin box, the kind that people used for important papers, dented and weathered but solid, the sort of box a careful man carried across a territory and never left behind. He opened it and found the receipt without searching for it, which meant he knew exactly where it was, which meant he had looked at it before she arrived. He handed it to her. She read it. Standard filing fee, $12. Clerk's stamp. Date March 14. 1,879. Clerk identifier J. Hooper. She turned it over on the back in faded pencil. Paid in full. No additional charges assessed. J.H. She looked at Cole. Did you write this? She said, pointing to the pencil note. Hooper wrote it, Cole said. I didn't ask him to. He just turned it over and wrote it before he handed it back. I didn't know why at the time. Eleanor sat with that for a long moment. He wrote it because he was being investigated, she said slowly. He knew he was under scrutiny, so he was documenting which transactions were clean. She looked at the receipt again. This notation, no additional charges assessed. This is Hooper covering himself. This is him creating a paper trail to show that this particular filing was legitimate. She looked up. Cole, this receipt is not just proof you paid the standard fee. It's proof that the clerk himself certified the Stein transaction was clean during an investigation period. Cole stared at the receipt. That's the opposite of fraud, she said. This is documentation that your claim was specifically noted as above board by the very clerk Voss is trying to use against you. Cole sat down on the step again. He put his face in his hands, not in distress, but in the particular exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a weight he didn't know, had an answer, and has just been told. The answer was in his own tin box the entire time. "I've had that receipt for 10 years, he said. "I know," she said. "I never read the back." "Most people don't read the back of receipts," she said. He looked at her. "We need to get this to Jensen today," she said. "It's almost dark. Jensen has a house as well as an office." Cole almost smiled. "You're going to knock on his door after dark." "I knocked on his door before dawn last week, and he answered," she said. "He's a man who understands that law doesn't keep business hours." She stood up. Cole stood with her. "Eleanor," he said. "We need to move. I know. 1 second." He put his hand on her arm, not stopping her, just making her stop. "Just long enough. I want to say something before we go back to working." She turned. He was looking at her in the last light of the afternoon, the mountains behind him going gold and dark. "I know you've been fighting this like it's yours to fight," he said. "And I know you've been doing it because it's right, and because you're capable, and because you don't do things halfway." He paused. "But I want you to know I see what it cost you. Every day. I see you calculating 3 moves ahead and carrying the weight of it and never showing the seams." He held her eyes. "And I want you to know that when this is over, when Voss is gone, and the filing is confirmed and the deed is corrected, I don't need you to keep fighting at that pace. I just need you to be here." She looked at him. "Cole," she said, "I'm not fighting because I have to prove something to you. I know that. I'm fighting because I want to," she said. "Because for the first time in 3 years, someone handed me a problem and trusted me to solve it, instead of managing me around it." She paused. "This is what it feels like when I'm not holding myself back." She held his gaze. "You should know what you're signing up for." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, quietly, "Good? I built the house big," he said. "There's room for all of it." She looked at him. She made a decision. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw briefly, deliberately, and then dropped it and turned toward the horse. "Let's go," she said. Behind her, she heard him exhale slowly, like a man releasing something he'd been holding for a very long time. They rode to Jensen's house. Jensen entered the door in his shirt sleeves with a coffee cup and the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by people arriving at his house with urgent legal problems. He looked at the receipt. He read the back. He read it again. He held it up toward his lamp and looked at it at an angle. "Where did you get this?" he said to Cole. "My filing receipt from 1879. You've had this for 10 years. "Yes." Jensen set it down on his kitchen table. "Sit down," he said to both of them. They sat. "The Hooper investigation," Jensen said, "was a real investigation. I know about it because I've dealt with 3 other Laramie clerk cases from that period. Hooper was processing side payments from a specific category of claimants, primarily out-of-state land speculation companies, who wanted to jump the queue on large commercial filings." He looked at Cole. "Were you a commercial filing?" "Single man, 1,200-acre agricultural claim," Cole said. "Then you were exactly the kind of claimant Hooper was not taking side payments from," Jensen said. "The investigation found that his improper payments came exclusively from commercial entities. Individual homestead and agricultural filers were clean." He tapped the receipt. "And this notation is exactly what I would expect to see on a receipt from that period from a clerk who was being careful about documentation." He looked at Eleanor. "You read this right. This is evidence of legitimacy, not fraud." "Then Voss's fraud complaint," Eleanor said. "If he files it, it will fail," Jensen said. "But filing it will trigger a review process that takes time. 3 to 6 months. During which your deed is in question. During which the correction filing is potentially suspended." He set his coffee down. "He knows it will fail. He's not trying to win the fraud case. He's trying to buy time and create uncertainty." "How do we cut it short?" Eleanor said. "You file first," Jensen said. "Not a response to a complaint that hasn't been filed yet, a proactive filing. A formal title verification request to the Territorial Land Office, attaching this receipt, the Hooper investigation records, and a legal brief establishing that your claim was among the specifically cleared agricultural filings of that period." He looked at Cole. "It's aggressive. It puts the Territorial Office on record about your claim's validity before Voss can get his complaint in front of them." "Can you do that?" Cole said. "I can do it in 48 hours if you give me everything you have." Jensen looked at Eleanor. "And if she helps me with the documentation organization?" "She will," Cole said. "I will," Eleanor said simultaneously. Jensen looked at the two of them. 48 hours, he said. "Come back tomorrow morning with everything in that tin box." They rode back up the mountain in the dark. And this time Eleanor didn't go to the boarding house, she went to the ranch. She sent Pete down with a note for Mabel. She sat at the desk in the side room until past midnight, going through Cole's tin box and every ledger and file he owned, building the documentation package Jensen needed. Cole worked beside her. Not on the documents, the legal organization was hers. He kept coffee coming, kept the fire built up, answered every question she asked about dates and transactions and land dealings without hesitation, and somewhere around 11 o'clock pulled a second chair up to the desk and just sat there while she worked, which was not useful in a practical sense and was, she found, essential in every other sense. At midnight she stopped. She looked at what they had built. It was complete, dated, cross-referenced. A documented history of 10 years of legitimate operation, anchored by a receipt with a pencil notation on the back that a careful clerk had written to protect himself and had accidentally protected Cole Maverick for the next decade. "This is everything," she said. "It's everything," Cole agreed. "Jensen can work with this, I know." She closed the last folder. Cole was watching her. "Ask me," she said without looking up. "Ask you what?" "Whatever it is you've been working up to for the last hour." He was quiet for a moment. "You said spring. Then you said you didn't mean that long." She looked at him. "I said I was beginning to be ready," she said. "You did. And then Voss showed up with a fraud allegation, and I have been operating at crisis level for the last 2 weeks. You have, which is not ideal timing for." She stopped. "For what?" he said, steadily. She folded her hands on the desk. "For saying yes," she said. The room was very quiet. Cole sat entirely still. "Eleanor," he said. "Not because of the land," she said quickly. "Not because of the claim or the deed or any of it. I want to be absolutely clear that this is not a strategic decision. I know it isn't, because I've been watching you for 2 months, she said. I've watched you sit across a desk and trust me to think. I've watched you sell horses below market to help a family and not tell anyone about it. I've watched you stand in a room full of people and let me lead when you could have led instead." She looked at him. "I've watched you build a house with 12 windows facing the light and then order curtains for it, like you'd been waiting for permission to make it real." She paused. "And I've been afraid. I've been very afraid. Because the last time I trusted something this much, I lost everything." Cole leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You haven't lost this," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm saying yes." Cole Maverick looked at Eleanor Dawson across a desk covered in 10 years of documented history and said nothing for a moment that was not empty but was very full. The way silences were full when people were feeling something larger than words moved efficiently through. Then he said, "I'd like to do it right. Ask you properly. When this is over and we're not surrounded by legal filings." "That's acceptable," she said. "I'll hold you to this," he said. "I expect you to," she said. He reached across the desk and covered her hand with his, the way he had in the field weeks ago, briefly, deliberately, and then went to get the last cup of coffee and set it in front of her without ceremony. "Drink, got work to do." "We do," she agreed. She drank the coffee. She went back to work. 2 days later, Jensen filed the proactive title verification request with the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne. It was 43 pages of documentation, property records, the annotated receipt, the Hooper investigation files Jensen had secured from the Territorial Archive, a legal brief establishing the clear category status of agricultural filings during the investigation period, and a formal certification of the adjacent parcel claim. Voss filed his fraud complaint 3 days after that. The Territorial Land Office wrote back to Voss's attorneys within a week. The letter was 4 paragraphs. It noted that the claim in question had already been the subject of a proactive title verification filing. It noted that the evidence submitted in that filing, including the J. Hooper receipt notation, was consistent with the documentation of legitimately processed claims established in the 1880 investigation conclusion. It noted that the fraud complaint lacked sufficient new evidentiary basis to warrant a formal review proceeding. And it noted that any further challenges to the Maverick Ranch title would need to present substantively new evidence not already addressed in the existing record. Jensen sent a copy to Cole and Eleanor by courier. Eleanor read it at the kitchen table of the ranch house on a Tuesday morning. She read it twice. She set it down. Cole was leaning against the counter watching her. "It's over," she said. "Not entirely," he said. "He could appeal. He could try a different angle." "He could," she said. "But look at what we've built in the last month. The title verification on record, the correction filing processing, the adjacent claim established, the valley landholders organized." The interference complaint documented. She looked up. Every angle he had is closed. He's a businessman. He calculates cost versus return. The cost of continuing to fight this has become higher than the return. You sound sure, he said. I am sure, she said. And then, more honestly, I'm 90% sure. The other 10% is me being realistic about the fact that men like Voss occasionally do things that aren't rational when they feel outmaneuvered. What does the 10% look like? He does something dramatic and public as a face-saving measure, she said. To show the territory he's not someone who gets beaten quietly. She thought about it. If he does that, it'll be in the next 2 weeks. Before he leaves Black Ridge, Cole crossed his arms. Then we stay ready, she agreed. She was right about the 10%. On a Friday afternoon, Harlan Voss walked into Harold Finch's general store where, as he clearly understood, every significant piece of information in Black Ridge passed at some point and made a speech. Eleanor heard about it from 3 different people. Before she'd been back in town an hour, each account carrying the same essential elements, Voss had addressed the store's assembled customers, and anyone who wandered in, delivered a prepared statement about the valley's future, and said, among other things, that the Maverick Ranch's legal situation remained unresolved, that the woman managing Cole Maverick's accounts had demonstrated a pattern of aggressive legal maneuvering that would ultimately harm the valley's relationship with outside investment, and that the community should consider carefully whether it wanted to be represented by people who chose confrontation over cooperation. He had called her aggressive. He had not called Cole aggressive. He had not addressed his own interference complaint, or the fence cutting, or the anonymous letter about her residency gap. He had simply publicly, in the most trafficked location in town, attempted to reframe from the person who had defended the valley into the person who had brought the fight. She heard about it from Mabel first. Mabel sat down across from her and told her every word she'd been told, and Eleanor listened without expression, and when Mabel finished, Eleanor sat for a moment. He's not going to file another complaint, she said. No, Mabel agreed. This is the face-saving measure. She looked at the table. He can't beat us legally, so he's trying to make the narrative his. Leave town having planted the idea that I'm the problem. Yes, Mabel said. Eleanor sat with it. She felt the anger, not the hot kind, but the colder kind that she'd felt in the hotel, the kind that sharpened rather than clouded. What are you going to do? Mabel said. Eleanor thought about it carefully. Nothing immediately, she said. If I respond today, it looks reactive. It confirms his framing. And if you wait, then the next piece of news that comes out of this situation will be the title verification clearing and the deed correction finalizing. And the valley will have a different story to tell about what happened here. Mabel studied her. You're thinking about this like a chess match, she said. I'm thinking about this like a woman who has been called aggressive for doing competent work, Eleanor said, which is not new, and which historically has one reliable response, which is, keep doing the work, Eleanor said, and let the results speak. She went back to the ranch that afternoon. Cole had heard about Voss's speech by the time she arrived. Pete had been in town and brought the news back in a state of considerable indignation. 2 of the other ranch hands had opinions about what should be done about it that involved things Eleanor wasn't going to sanction. She understood the feeling. She declined the suggestions. Cole was quieter. He was in the barn when she arrived, working on a piece of harness with the focused attention of a man who was doing something physical, because the alternative was something he'd been told not to do. You heard, she said. I heard. He set down the harness. And I want to ride into town and correct some things publicly, he said. But I'm not going to, because you'd tell me not to, and you'd be right. I would and I would be, she said. So what do? We wait, she said. The title verification will clear within 2 weeks. The correction filing will finalize shortly after. When both of those are on record, I want to hold another meeting at Finch's. Not to argue about what Voss said, to present the outcome. What we built, what we protected. She looked at him. Let the community draw their own conclusions about who was fighting for what. Cole nodded slowly, he said. I've had to be, she said. It's a different kind of strength, he said. The patient kind. I don't always have it. She looked at him. You're patient with me, she said. He held her eyes. That's different, is it? She said. You've been waiting for something for 10 years. You built a house for it. You ordered curtains for it. She paused. That's patience. He was quiet. When Jensen's confirmation comes through, he said, I want to ask you properly. The way I said. I know, she said. I want you to have what you said you wanted, he said. Something of your own, where your presence isn't contingent on being useful. He looked at the barn ceiling, then back at her. I've been thinking about the northeast parcel. Your claim. Even after this is settled, that land is yours, filed in your name. I don't want to absorb it into the ranch. I want it to stay yours. She blinked. Cole, 15 acres, he said. It's not large, but it's yours. Title in your name, separate from the ranch. If you decide in 5 years that this isn't where you want to be, he stopped. I hope that doesn't happen. But if it does, you have land. You have a foundation. It's not contingent on anything. She stared at him. She had thought she had assumed that the claim was a legal maneuver, and that once the legal situation resolved, it would fold into the ranch the way everything eventually folded into whatever the man owned. She had not expected this. She didn't have words immediately, which was unusual for her. Cole watched her not having words. You're not going to argue? He said. I'm processing, she said. Take your time. She looked at him for a long moment. That is the most she stopped. Started again. A man once told me that everything I had was shared property by virtue of being his wife, she said quietly. He meant it kindly. It still meant I owned nothing. She looked at Cole. You're offering me land before the marriage. I'm offering you land independent of any marriage, he said. Because you earned it. And because you should never again be in a position where your standing is contingent on someone else's. She turned away. Not because she was upset, because she needed a moment where he couldn't see her face. She stood in the barn doorway and looked out at the mountain and breathed the cold air and let the thing she was feeling exist without managing it, which she was still learning how to do. Then she turned back. All right, she said. All right. I accept, she said. The land, the terms, the all of it. Cole exhaled slowly. Good, he said. And when Jensen's letter comes, she said, ask me properly. I will somewhere with reasonable light, not a barn. Something in his expression did the warm, quiet thing. I know a porch with good eastern light, he said. That'll do, she said. Jensen's letter arrived on a Thursday 14 days after the Territorial Land Office's response to Voss's complaint. Cole's deed correction was finalized. The boundary description was officially amended. The northeast parcel claim in Eleanor Dawson's name was confirmed as validly established. All challenges pending or anticipated were noted in the record as addressed and resolved. Harlan Voss had left Black Ridge 2 days prior, without announcement, his hotel bill paid by Aldridge on his behalf. Nobody had seen him go. He had simply stopped being there one morning, which was, Eleanor thought, the most honest thing he'd done during his entire time in the valley. Jensen sent the letter to the ranch because Eleanor was at the ranch. She was at the ranch because she had moved there 3 weeks prior, under the professional arrangement Mabel had described to anyone who asked, which nobody had disputed because Mabel Cartwright's descriptions of arrangements were treated in Black Ridge with the same deference afforded to acts of God and weather patterns. She was in the side room when Pete brought the letter in. She read it once. She stood up. She walked out to the porch. Cole was at the fence near the south pasture. She could see him from the porch, working with one of the men on a gate that had been giving trouble for a week. She watched him for a moment, the ease of the way he moved, the particular unhurried confidence of a man entirely at home in his own land, and felt something in her chest that she recognized now and no longer argued with. She walked out to the south pasture. He saw her coming and said something to his ranch hand, who took the hint and found something to do on the other side of the fence. Cole met her halfway. She held up the letter. He read it. He read it again. He looked up. She watched his face move through the thing it moved through, relief. And then something deeper, the letting go of something that had been held tightly for too long. It's done, he agreed. He folded the letter, held it for a moment, looked out at the 1,200 acres of the mountain, the land he had built from nothing, the land that was now, unambiguously, his. Then he looked at her. Come to the porch, he said. She went with him. On the east-facing side of the porch, in the morning light that the house had been built to catch, Cole Maverick stopped and turned and looked at Eleanor Dawson with an expression that had nothing managed or contained about it. You told me to ask you properly, he said. I've been thinking about what that means. He paused. I don't have a speech. I'm not built for speeches. But here's what I know. He looked at her directly. You walked into a room with a man who destroys things for a living, and you took him apart with a receipt you found in a tin box that I didn't know what I had. You organized 11 Valley families and a property attorney and a residency confirmation brief, and you carried most of it without telling me how much it was costing you. He stopped. And you did all of that not because I asked you to. Because you chose to. Eleanor kept her eyes on his. I want to spend the rest of my life watching you choose things, he said. I want to be the person beside you when you do. I want you to have the land that's yours and the desk that's yours, and whatever pieces of this life fit the shape of what you want. And I want to build the rest of it with you the way I build everything board by board, made to last. He was quiet. Then, very simply, marry me, Eleanor. The porch was still. The light was exactly what the house had been built to catch. Eleanor Dawson stood in it and thought about a suitcase held shut with a belt, and $11, and a brood she'd called a doorframe, and a woman who had stopped expecting anything from life in order to survive it. She thought about what it had taken to get here, how far, how much. She thought about 12 windows. Yes, she said. No qualification, just yes. Cole put his hand against her face, his broad, careful hand, the hand that had built everything around them, and she put hers over it, and they stood on the porch in the morning light for a moment that was entirely theirs. I should tell Mabel, she said after a while. She probably already knows, he said. She probably does, Eleanor agreed. She was smiling. Not the almost smile she'd been defending against for months. A real one, full and present, the kind that changed her whole face. Cole was looking at it like it was the most important thing he'd seen on that mountain in 10 years. We should have the Valley families back at Finch's, she said. Present the deed outcome. Let them see what we built together. We should, he said. And I want to write to Jensen about formalizing the parcel boundary between our properties. Make sure it's recorded correctly. Whatever you need, he said. And the books are a month behind because I've been fighting land fraud instead of doing accounts. Eleanor, he put both hands on her shoulders, looked at her steadily. For one morning, can we not do the work? She looked at him. It's 11 o'clock, she said. I know what time it is. There are 17 items on my list, I know there are. And the South Pasture Gate still isn't, Eleanor. His voice was warm and certain and patient in the way she had come to understand, was not restraint but simply what he was. We just got engaged. She stopped. She looked at him. She took a breath. One morning, she said. One morning, he agreed. She turned toward the valley and leaned against the porch racing beside him, and looked out at Blask Ridge below, and the mountains above, and the land stretching out in every direction, hers and his and theirs, earned and fought for, and real. One morning, she gave herself that. It was, she discovered, enough. It was, she discovered, more than enough. It was what everything else had been built toward, not the deed victory, not the organized valley or the confirmed claim, but this. A porch in the morning light. A man who had built 12 windows to catch it. A woman who had finally stopped moving. The mountain held them both. The house waited behind them, its rooms ready, its windows curtained now in fabric Eleanor had cut and sewn with her own hands, the first thing she had made for this place that was both of theirs. And, somewhere below, Blackridge went about its Tuesday morning, 340 souls moving through their ordinary lives, not yet knowing that the fight was over, and that the mountain above them was at last, at peace. And, somewhere below, Blackridge went about its Tuesday morning, 340 souls moving through their ordinary lives, not yet knowing that the fight was over, but that would change before the week was out, because Eleanor Dawson had never in her life left an important truth sitting unspoken when it could be said clearly and on the record. The meeting at Finch's store happened on a Thursday evening. Eleanor had written the notices herself. 12 of them, one for each Valley family that had sat in that room 6 weeks ago and made the decision to hold. She kept the language simple and direct. The Maverick Ranch title had been confirmed by the Territorial Land Office. The deed correction was finalized. The adjacent parcel claim was established. The challenge was over. She invited them to come hear the full account, because these families had trusted her with something significant, and they deserved to know how it ended. Every one of them came. The store was fuller than it had been for the first meeting. People brought their wives who hadn't come before. Clara Hennessy brought her adult daughter. Harold Finch had pushed the display cases back to make more room and was standing behind his counter with an expression of contained satisfaction that was the closest he got to joy. Cole stood at the back. Eleanor stood at the front. She walked them through it, not dramatically, not with any performance of triumph. She laid it out the way she laid out accounts, clearly, sequentially, with every piece of evidence named and its significance explained. The title verification filing, the Hooper receipt, the Territorial Land Office's rejection of the fraud complaint, the correction finalized, The adjacent claim confirmed. She told them about the fence cutting and the interference complaint. She told them about the anonymous letter and the residency gap and the Laramie hotel receipt she'd had in her bag. She told them about Jensen and the 43 pages of documentation and the 4-paragraph letter from Cheyenne that had ended it. She did not editorialize. She did not characterize Voss beyond the documented facts. She let the facts do what facts did when they were assembled honestly. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Garfield, the Mid-Valley rancher who had almost taken Voss's offer on his East 40 acres, raised his hand. "What would have happened," he said slowly, "if you hadn't filed that adjacent claim?" Eleanor looked at him. "Voss would have acquired standing to challenge the Maverick deed," she said. "The challenge would have taken 12 to 18 months to resolve. During that time, Cole's operating costs would have continued, and his legal costs would have mounted. Even winning the challenge," she paused, "he might have had to sell anyway, because being right doesn't mean you can afford to fight." Garfield nodded. "And the rest of us," he said, "if the Maverick Ranch had sold." "Voss would have had the mountain plateau," Eleanor said, "which is the water access for the entire Upper Valley. He'd have controlled development terms for every property along the railroad corridor." She let that sit. "Your 40 acres, Mr. Garfield, would have been worth exactly what he offered you for it. Not a dollar more." The room was very quiet. Clara Hennessy spoke first. "I want to say something," Clara said, and she didn't wait for acknowledgement. 6 weeks ago, I had already decided to take Voss's offer. I had the letter drafted." She looked at Eleanor. "You walked into Finch's store that first meeting and laid it out so plain that I couldn't pretend I didn't understand it. And I've been farming this valley for 22 years, and I understand my land, and I've never understood the legal side of it the way I understood it that night." She paused. "What I want to say is thank you for not letting us be separated from each other and picked off one at a time." Eleanor held Clara's eyes. She was not going to get emotional in Harold Finch's general store in front of 12 Valley families. She almost got emotional anyway. "You held," she said. "That was you, all of you. I gave you information, you made the decision. You gave us the spine to make it," Clara said simply. Harold Finch cleared his throat from behind the counter. "I think what Clara is saying," he said, with the authority of a man who had been the center of town information for 30 years, "is that Black Ridge owes you a debt." He looked at Eleanor, then at Cole at the back of the room. "Both of you." Cole said nothing. He was looking at Eleanor. She knew the look by now, the one that had nothing managed about it. She looked away before it undid her entirely and told everyone that the documentation copies were available with Jensen and Larrabee if anyone had questions about their own deed filings, and that she was happy to help organize any additional correction filings that might be needed for other Valley properties. The meeting broke up slowly, the way meetings did when people had more to say to each other than the formal part had made room for. People came to Eleanor individually, shook her hand. Some of them just nodded, the ranch people, the ones who said things with nods rather than words. She accepted all of it with the same level steadiness and felt, quietly and entirely, that she was where she was supposed to be. Cole walked with her when they finally left. The night was cold and clear, the stars very bright above Black Ridge. "Finch is going to be talking about this for 10 years, Cole said. "Finch was already talking about it before we got there," Eleanor said. "He called you extraordinary, Finch, who has never called anyone anything except useful or useless. He called us a debt," she said. "That's Finch's version of extraordinary." He looked at her sideways. "You know that room changed tonight, the way they see you." "I know," she said. "Does it matter to you what they think?" She considered the question honestly. "It matters that they see it accurately," she said. "Not what they think of me personally, but the truth of what happened, yes. That matters." She paused. "I've had the story told wrong about me before, by people with more authority than me in the room. I couldn't correct it then." She looked at the stars. "I can correct it here. It matters." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You know what I kept thinking, watching you in that room?" he said. "What?" "That the woman who arrived here 2 months ago with a broken suitcase latch would barely recognize herself right now." Eleanor stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "She would recognize herself," Eleanor said. "That's the thing, this isn't new." She turned to face him. "This is who I was before everything was taken. Before I spent 3 years making myself smaller so I could survive." She held his eyes. "You didn't make me this, Cole. You just didn't require me to be less." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "That's what I mean." She looked at him. And then, because they were on an empty street in Black Ridge at 9 o'clock in the evening, and she was 34 years old, and she was done being careful about everything all the time, she stepped forward and kissed him. It was brief and certain, and entirely deliberate. When she stepped back, he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before, which was remarkable because she thought she had catalogued most of them by now. "You could have warned me," he said very quietly. "Would you have wanted warning?" "No," he said. "Then stop complaining," she said, and started walking again. He caught up. He was almost smiling. He was smiling. She didn't look at it directly, because she was afraid of how much she liked it. They were married on a Saturday in November, in the Black Ridge Church, which doubled as the schoolhouse on weekdays, and which had never, according to Harold Finch, been so full for a wedding. Eleanor wore her good dress, the one she had carried at the bottom of her suitcase, through everything, through Cheyenne and Laramie and the wagon and 3 towns, the one she had never let herself sell even when money was tight, because some things you held on to without knowing exactly why. She knew why now. Mabel Cartwright sat in the front row and looked precisely as unsurprised as a woman who had seen this coming since the first week. Jensen came up from Larrabee, Patricia Holt and her husband, the 12 Valley families, most of them filling the pews with the specific warmth of people who understood they were witnessing something they had a small part in making possible. Cole stood at the front of the church in a new shirt, not a suit, because he was not a suit man, and Eleanor had explicitly told him she didn't want a suit man, and watched her walk down the aisle with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this and was in no hurry for the moment to end. The preacher kept it short because Cole had asked him to, and Eleanor had seconded the request. The vows were the standard ones. Eleanor had considered writing her own, but had ultimately decided that the spoken plainly and meant completely were more true than anything she could construct to be more original, to have and to forward, for better or worse. She said them looking directly at Cole. He said them looking directly at her. When it was done, Finch, who had somehow appointed himself master of the reception without anyone formally agreeing to this, announced that there was pie in the adjoining room, and the church became exactly the kind of warm, noisy human gathering that Cole Maverick had been building toward for 10 years without quite having the language for what he was building toward. Eleanor stood beside him and accepted congratulations from people she had known for 2 months, and felt, with a clarity that surprised her, that 2 months was sufficient, that a person could know in 2 months what mattered, and what didn't, and who was worth staying for. That sometimes the move you most need to make is the one that looks, from the outside, like you've stopped moving. Clara Hennessy pressed her hand and said, "You're good for this valley. Both of you." Garfield shook Cole's hand and said something low that made Cole laugh, the real laugh. The short, surprised one that Eleanor was beginning to understand was how he expressed things too large for other kinds of response. Pete Darrow, who was 22 and had an expressive face and no ability to conceal what he was feeling, looked at both of them with an expression of such transparent relief and happiness that Eleanor had to look away to keep from laughing. Mabel waited until most people had made their way to the pie, before she found Eleanor near the window. Mabel said, "Well," Eleanor agreed. "I knew before you did," Mabel said. Serenely, "You did not. I knew the day you told me you weren't interested." Mabel straightened Eleanor's collar with the specific authority of a woman who has earned it. People who are genuinely not interested don't specify it. Eleanor looked at her. "I hate that you're right about everything," she said. "I know," Mabel said. "It's a burden I carry gracefully." She kissed Eleanor's cheek and went to get pie. That evening, when the last guest had gone and the church was quiet and Black Ridge had settled into its nighttime rhythms, Cole and Eleanor rode up the mountain together in the dark, not for the first time. They had ridden this road dozens of times in the months before, but it was different now in the specific way that things were different when the deciding was done, and what remained was only the living. The house was lit. Pete and the crew had put lanterns in the windows, all 12 of them, so that the house on the mountain blazed with warm light visible from the valley below, a signal that meant something even if no one in the valley had planned for it to mean anything. Cole stopped his horse when he saw it. He looked at it for a long moment. Eleanor stopped beside him and looked too. The house he had built board by board, room by room, across 4 years and 10 years of waiting, the house with the 12 windows facing every direction to catch the light at different hours. The house with the porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The house with the fireplace made from the mountain's own stone, and the ceilings high enough that he could stand straight, and the floors he had laid himself, plank by plank. During 3 winters of solitary work, that house was lit from the inside. Every window. It looked exactly like what he had been building toward. It looked like home. Your crew did that, Eleanor said softly. They're good men, Cole said. His voice was not entirely steady. She let it be unsteady. She didn't pretend not to notice, and she didn't make anything of it, which was the particular grace of a woman who understood that large men with quiet hearts felt things as deeply as anyone, and needed neither commentary nor performance around those feelings. They rode up. The house was warm inside, the fire built up, and Pete and the others had left a supper covered on the kitchen table and made themselves very scarce, which Eleanor noted with approval. She stood in the kitchen of the house that was now hers, and felt the specific weight of that word hers settle through her without resistance. Not because Cole had given it to her, because she had earned her right to be here, in every sense of the word. With her knowledge and her work, and her willingness to stand in a hotel room and dismantle a man's legal strategy piece by piece, and ride up a mountain in the dark with documents and not back down from any of it. She was here because she had chosen to be here. That was the difference. That was the whole difference. Cole came up behind her and put his hands on her shoulders, steady, warm, the hands that had built every surface in this room, and they stood in the kitchen, where they had sat at 2 in the morning with coffee and the weight of a fight that was now behind them. We should eat, she said. He agreed. Neither of them moved immediately. I want to tell you something, he said, and then I won't say it again, because I'm not a man who repeats himself when a thing is said right once. She turned. He was looking at her with the direct, unguarded expression that she had learned to receive without flinching. When that woman left, he said, 8 years ago, I finished the house anyway, every room. And when I was done, I walked through it and I understood that I had built something I didn't know how to fill. He paused. I've been building things wrong ever since. Barns and fences and water systems and all of it right. All of it solid. None of it the thing I actually needed. He looked at her. You walked into my store to order curtains. And you priced them fair, and you shook my hand like it mattered, and I understood something I hadn't understood in 8 years. What? She said quietly. That the house wasn't empty because nobody had come, he said. It was empty because I'd stopped believing anyone would. He held her eyes. You gave that back to me, before anything else, just by being exactly who you are. Eleanor stood in the warm kitchen of the mountain house, and understood, with the clarity of someone who had traveled a long way to arrive somewhere, that this was what she had been moving toward through everything, not away from the losses, but toward this. I'm going to make mistakes, she said. I know. I'm going to reorganize systems you've had in place for years and be right about it and not be apologetic about being right. I know that too. And I'm going to need the desk in the side room to be mine. Permanently. It already is, he said. Has been since September. She looked at him. He almost smiled. She kissed him again, not brief this time. When she stepped back, his hands were in her hair, and his expression was the warmest she had ever seen it, and the house held them both in its quiet and waited for the rest of the years they were going to fill it with. They ate supper late, at the kitchen table, talking about nothing consequential, the south pasture gate, that still needed fixing, whether to expand the horse operation in the spring, what Clara Hennessy had said to Jensen at the reception that had made him laugh into his coffee. Easy conversation. The kind that meant people were comfortable enough not to need significance in every word. Afterward, Eleanor washed the dishes and Cole dried them, which was not discussed or assigned. It simply happened. The natural choreography of two people beginning to learn the shape of each other's daily life. She handed him the last plate. I want to write to my sister, she said. He looked at her, Margaret, in Cheyenne. Eleanor looked at the window. We didn't part well, her husband, she stopped. She didn't stop him. And I've been angry about that for 8 months. She was quiet. But she's still my sister. Cole dried the plate without speaking. I don't know if she'll write back, Eleanor said. You don't need her to, he said. You need to write it. She looked at him. Yes, she said, that's exactly right. He set the plate on the shelf. Write it tomorrow, he said. Tonight, come see something. He led her to the porch, the east-facing side, the one with the morning light. In the dark, the valley was laid out below them. Black ridges, lights small and warm at the bottom. The mountains on the other side black against a star-thick sky. The cold air was clean and sharp. The house was warm at their backs. "I used to come out here at night," Cole said, "when the ranch was new and it was just me. I'd stand here and look at the valley and think, this is what I built. This is what I made." He looked out, and then I'd go back inside and there'd be nobody to say that to. Eleanor stood beside him. "You can say it to me now," she said. He turned, he looked at her. "This is what we built," he said. And meant all of it: the land, the legal fight, the deed confirmed and corrected and defended, the valley organized and protected, the house finally full. Eleanor looked out at the dark valley below and the bright stars above and the mountain holding them at its peak, and felt the truth of it all the way through her. "Yes," she said, "it is." They stood on the porch until the cold drove them inside, and the house with 12 windows built to catch the light closed around them both, warm and solid and real, the way things built right and built to last always were. Cole Maverick had spent 10 years building walls, barns, fences, and every room of a house on a Wyoming mountain. He had built all of it correctly. He had built all of it alone. Eleanor Dawson had spent 3 years learning to survive without depending on anyone. She had become expert at it. She had become so expert that she had nearly lost the thing that made surviving worth doing. Neither of them had been wrong about what they needed. They had simply been wrong about needing to find it alone. The giant cowboy finally had what he had been building toward since the first board was laid: not more land, not legal victory, not a corrected deed. Though he had all of those now. He had a family. One person chosen deliberately who stood beside him and faced whatever came and trusted him to face it back. And Eleanor Dawson, who had arrived in Black Ridge with a broken suitcase and $11, and a heart that had learned not to expect too much from life, had found the only home that had ever mattered, not the one built from timber and mountain stone, though that was extraordinary, and she knew it. The home where her voice was the first one consulted, where her judgment was trusted before she had to prove it, where her presence was not contingent on her usefulness, but on the simple, sufficient fact of who she was. She had stopped moving, and what she found when she finally stopped was that she had not arrived at an ending. She had arrived at a beginning, the kind that holds.